Welcome everybody to Impressions Gallery online. I'm Pippa Oldfield and I'm the head of programme. A very warm welcome this afternoon to our Seedscapes Symposium. I'm saying afternoon, but obviously depending on what time zone you're in, it might be morning for you as well, so welcome. Before we begin, I've just got some housekeeping to run through with you. So you've all been muted on entry, and if we can ask you to please keep your mic on mute. And it's up to you whether you want to have your video on or off. Just to let you know, you're probably aware that there's a little red button in the corner of the screen. That's because we are recording this event for the future. Just to let you know that only the active speakers will be recorded. None of the chat will be recorded, and the details of attendees, your names, they won't appear either. And we'll be making this recording available on our website afterwards. If you have any questions, please add them using the chat function. And if you're tweeting about the event today, the hashtag is Seedscapes and our Twitter handle is @galleryphoto. Angela or Jane, maybe you could just pop that in the chat as well so everybody's got that. So the symposium is part of the programme of events to accompany our current exhibition, Seedscapes, Future-Proofing Nature. And this is a very timely exhibition that explores insights into the current biodiversity crisis and how artists and scientists are working on global efforts to safeguard vital plant species from extinction. Seedscapes has been curated by Liz Wells, Emeritus Professor at University of Plymouth, who's with us today, and we're delighted to have been working with Liz as the curator on this exhibition. She's one of the UK's foremost photography scholars specialising in landscape and environment. Just to let you know as well that Seedscapes is a national touring exhibition from Impressions Gallery. We're very pleased to be working in partnership with our touring venues and partners, the Royal Albert Memorial Museum and Art Gallery in Exeter. And Seedscapes will be travelling there from 6th of February to the 2nd of May next year. And also to the Dick Institute in Kilmarnock, Scotland, where the show will be going in autumn next year. We're very grateful to the Paul Mellon Centre for Studies in British Art for supporting this symposium and many of our talks and events. And I'd also like to thank Spectrum Photographic, our print and mounting sponsor, and to the Norwegian Embassy for their support of promoting the exhibition. Also, just to let you know, if you're not already aware, we've got a fantastic virtual gallery experience online. We're obviously very sad that we can't have you at the gallery in person and you can't see the exhibition for yourselves, but it is a great resource. So you might want to have a look at that in the break, and we'll pop the link to that into the chat as well. So we have a great lineup for you this afternoon. We've got all 5 of the exhibiting artists taking part: Dornith Doherty, Sant Khalsa, Chrystel Lebas, Heidi Morstang and Liz Orton, and as well as special guest speakers Simran, Sethi and Miranda, Lowe, all of whom are joining us from various parts of the globe. Very early for some of you, so thank you very much. I can see Sant there. So I'll just run through how the event's going to run. We're going to begin with an introduction to the exhibition, and that will be a short film narrated by Curator Liz Wells. And then we're going to hear from biodiversity specialist Simran Sethi about the overall importance of seeds and about the urgency of this issue. Then we'll go straight into our first panel, which is Reactivating Archives, and that will be chaired by Director of Impressions Gallery Anne McNeill. We'll be having presentations by artists Chrystel Lebas and Liz Orton, and we'll also be hearing from Miranda, Lowe, who is curator at the Natural History Museum in London, followed by questions for the panel. At 3:30, we're going to have a break, half an hour. We all know how tiring it is on Zoom and how intense it can be, so we've got a half hour to kind of go away and have a coffee, come back refreshed at 4 p.m, and then we'll have our second panel, Seeding Change, and this will be chaired by Liz Wells. Presenting their work will be Heidi Morstang, Dornith Doherty and Sant Khalsa, and that will be followed by questions. At 5 p.m, I'll be inviting back all of our contributors for a final discussion and Q&A, and that will end at 5:30 p.m. So please do add your questions as we're going along using the chat function. We'll do our best to answer as many of these as we can. One of the things that we really love about Impressions events is our audience and how they participate, and you all come up with really interesting questions. We really welcome your input, so we look forward to that. So I think that is it for the introduction. And if we're all ready, Angela, I think we are going to just sit back and now enjoy a 9-minute film, which is an introduction to Seedscapes, narrated by Liz Wells.
Seeds matter. Plants can survive without humans, but we cannot survive without plants. Yet, given worldwide threats from conflict, global warming, pollution, and, as we have recently been reminded, pandemics, biodiversity and seed sustainability are at risk. Pictures have the power to inform and influence us. So as a curator and academic who has spent many years investigating photography and the environment, I wanted to produce an exhibition exploring these urgent issues. Seedscapes, Future-Proofing Nature, brings together 5 international artists, each of whom brings her own particular artistic way of seeing to this important theme. My hope is that the exhibition encourages visitors to reflect on ecological ideas and issues, whilst also enjoying fascinating photographs and moving imagery. Prosperous Mountain by Norwegian artist Heidi Morstang takes us to Svalbard, the site of the global seed vault, where duplicates of seeds from around the world are stored deep under the ice in what was once a mine shaft. Her contemplative video explores qualities of light and space in this remote archipelago area, as well as noting marks of human presence as new seed deposits are flown in. She also portrays seeds from flora in a sheltered valley, where plants grow despite the Arctic climate, and uses an electron microscope to reveal detail imperceptible to the human eye. These pictures depict shapes and textures, such as extraordinary inner landscapes, rather like extraterrestrial pictures, that are not at all how we might imagine the insides of tiny seeds. In archiving Eden, American artist Dornith Doherty brings together clusters of seeds in digitally fabricated collages based on X-rays. She produces these images as lenticular prints, a technical process that involves sandwiching 2 or more photographs and reproducing them using magnifying lenses. For example, in her picture of huskcorn seedlings, the seeds appear animated, gently dancing as we move towards them. The artist also documented laboratory systems and spaces unfamiliar to those other than the scientists and technicians who work there. She remarks that it seemed to her that by saving seeds, individuals and institutions from around the world were working together to ensure the survival of entire plant species. This forms part of what she termed a heroic fight to preserve the biodiversity of life on Earth. We might add that she is contributing to this through using images to encourage interest in ecological issues. An artist residency scheme allowed British artist Liz Orton to access seed collections at Kew Gardens in London, where she became particularly interested in specimens that had been donated but not catalogued. Her photographs reveal seeds, stems and leaves half concealed in the packing materials in which they arrived, maybe up to a century ago. The title, Splitters and Lumpers, references classification systems that distinguish between the distinctiveness of each seed or lump them within larger groups. A concertina book, Herbarium of Extinction, made specially for this exhibition, further explores the idea of collection. Based on digitalized versions of botanical specimens, Orton defines it as a reflection on evolution, loss, and representation. It includes pictures of plant specimens that are between 100 and 200 years old from now extinct species. The work reminds us that nature is mutable. No plant is safe. The exhibition falls loosely into two sections. The first, as I have described, primarily considers seeds and collections. The second section reflects on woodlands as a dynamic space subject to human intervention as well as to ecological shifts. Having grown up in a rural area in France, Chrystel Lebas has a long-term interest in change in the landscape. For field studies, she retraced the footsteps of Edward James Salisbury, director at Kew 1943 to 57, who, as a young botanist and ecologist in the early 20th century, had photographed in Scotland, Devon and Norfolk. The Salisbury collection of glass slides at the Natural History Museum had lain there unidentified. Lebas was invited to make contact prints and eventually found an image with Salisbury's signature. It turned out that his diaries corresponding to the slides were in the archives at Kew. The images and notes had been separated. Once reunited, it was possible to identify locations, retrace his journeys, and re-photograph vegetation as it is now, thereby offering visual evidence of botanical change. Her pictures bring together his small original photographs and diary notes from a century ago with her larger recent photographs of the same places, in some cases offering us 3-metre wide panoramic views. In 1992, Sant Khalsa, an environmental artist and activist based in California, planted about 1,000 pine trees as part of a collaboration to reforest the Holcomb Valley, originally cleared by settlers during the 1860 Southern California gold rush. The aim was to improve air quality to counteract pollution in nearby urban areas, hence her project title, Growing Air. She embarked on an annual ritual of nurturing and planting new seedlings. Her companion series, Trees and Seedlings, features wooden sculptures with integrated photographic images set in glass and lit to create ethereal reflections, suggesting memories of vegetation lost. We are reminded of the importance of woodlands and wildness for nature and for our well-being. My aim throughout Seedscapes has been to maintain a balance between aesthetics and socio-ecological values, between visual poetics and activism. I hope that visitors find the exhibition stimulating and enjoyable.
Well, thank you very much, Liz. That was a great introduction to the exhibition. It was lovely seeing the work again. Actually, we haven't been in the gallery for a few weeks due to lockdown, so it was great to kind of be reunited with it. And for everybody watching at home, you can watch this video again. It's on our website and it's also on our YouTube channel. So I am really delighted to introduce our first guest speaker, Simran Sethi, who is joining us from Merida in Mexico. And Simran is a multimedia journalist, academic, public speaker. She describes herself as being endlessly curious about psychology, sustainability, food, and people and places that nourish us. Vogue India named her one of the 50 most influential global Indians, and Vanity Fair has described her as the environmental messenger. Simran has written for the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, National Geographic, the Washington Post, and the Guardian. Marie Claire named her one of the top 8 women saving the planet. And Simran is also the author of Bread, Wine, Chocolate, The Slow Loss of Foods We Love, which is named one of the best food books of 2016 by the Smithsonian, about the story of changes in food and agriculture. And we'll put a link to that in the chat as well. And Simran is also the contributing author of Ethical Markets, Growing the Green Economy. We're really delighted to have you with us, Simran. Over to you.
Thank you so much. Thank you to all of you. Thank you, Pippa, Liz, Impressions Gallery. It's such a delight to be joining you this morning from Merida, Mexico, the land of the Maya people. I'm so moved also by the images I just saw of Heidi's work. My last trip was to Svalbard back in March, and it's bringing back just really, really lovely memories of that. That was a historic deposit into the seed vault, bringing together people from all over the world for the largest deposit since their inception, and I had the privilege of starting off there that event. So I'll back up a bit. Pippa referenced my book. Several years ago, I told my book editor at HarperCollins that I wanted to write a book about seeds. And at the time, he dismissed the idea, saying something like, seeds aren't sexy, right? That was the shorthand. And I subsequently shared this story while interviewing a man named Luigi Guarino, who's the senior scientist at the Global Crop Trust that oversees the seed vault in Svalbard. As you all know, that is the biggest and most important backup collection of seeds in the world. So when we say backup, what we mean by that is that there are seed collections all over the world, but as a kind of, and we are saving seeds for a number of reasons, which I'll get into, but then every one of those institutions, if they have the means and accessibility, they want to do a backup of their collection. And they'll do that in a number of places, but the one that sort of where they all coalesce to whatever extent we can is there in Svalbard, where the seeds are, as mentioned, buried under permafrost. So in any case, I met Luigi, and this was in Rome, in Italy, and he seemed really disinterested in me. I think he was like picking his teeth with my business card. And I was interviewing him and Carrie Fowler, who helped found the Seed Vault. And when I mentioned this thing about my editor, he kind of leaned in and he said, you know, Simran, I don't understand. Seeds are sex. And that was a turning point for me because they are. They're living, breathing embryos. They are integral to the creation of all life. They're the beginning and the end and the beginning all over again. So I feel like that was the pin drop moment that my work changed. I returned to the United States. I called my editor. I said, I need to write a book about what is happening with seeds, the stories of seeds. And if you don't want that book, I'll take it somewhere else. Like, that's how much conviction I had. I left my tenured academic post. I sold my house. I gave away my car. I spent 5 years on 6 continents, meeting people from Ethiopia to the UK, from Australia to Ecuador, who are saving these plant collections that were referenced. Now, we don't just save plant material, and we don't just save seeds. We save all kind of what is collectively called germplasm. For example, I visited the National Collection of Yeast Cultures in Norwich that saves yeast. I visited the collection, which is our collection in the US, the kind of bunker that's saving cattle embryo, honeybee semen, as well as seeds and other plant material in the United States. And of course, the seeds that are there in Svalbard. Seeds are not only the beginning of food, which is what I focus on in my book, but they're the beginning of cotton for clothes, corn for fuel, wood for shelter, plants for medicine. Everything that we rely on can come in some way from seed, right? It's the fodder for the animals that we eat. And all of these things are disappearing. I focus in my work as seeds as the building blocks of every meal that we eat. Our fruits and vegetables, our grain, the meat that's raised on grass and grain, the barley seeds that bring forth beer, grape seeds for wine, because this story is so intimate to us, right? It's one that we ingest. When I was a child, I was told to spit out the seeds. Now I understand that the seeds were always within me. They are embedded in us. They are the story of us. I think seeds are also a great way to underscore the reason that we need to pay critical attention to how seeds have evolved over time. Roughly 1 year ago, the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations released a landmark report on agricultural biodiversity. This is resonant with other reports on biodiversity in general, but I want to stay focused on food. That report revealed of the roughly 6,000 plant species that are used for food, only 9 account for 2/3 of the world's crop production. 95% of the world's calories now come from just 30 crops. 1/3 of global fish stocks are overfished, and most of our milk, meat, and eggs come from a handful of animal species. Now, as I mentioned, this is part of that broader biodiversity challenge that was brought to the fore last May when the Global Assessment Report on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services revealed that 1 out of every 8 of the world's plant and animal species are now at risk of extinction. I'll add one more bit of information to this. Research analyzing 50 years of data on global diets that confirms a worldwide trend towards sameness. Meals that are at their foundation made up of wheat, rice, maize, potatoes, soybean, and palm oil in the same types and around the same amounts. So I want you to just sit with that for a moment. The same types means the homogenization of our food system, the shrinking down of our diet. The same amounts contributes to our global epidemic of both underweight and obesity, right? And because of the way we are consuming them, often through ultra-processed foods, an epidemic of malnutrition. We may consume a tremendous number of calories, but not the micronutrients that actually keep us healthy. Now, in areas of food insecurity, increased calories are absolutely vital, but that shrinkage of what we grow and eat to just that small handful of seed varieties, what is known as a loss of agricultural biodiversity, is an unintended consequence of a system that was originally designed to feed the world, right? Which is large-scale industrialized agriculture. In that system, right, that system designed for efficiency and for to accommodate volume, to increase scale, we raise monocultures, single crops grown in large spaces with little genetic variance. So you start to see that bottleneck happen. And then you start to understand why, when we have so much available to us, why we are increasingly growing so few varieties. It makes it easier to add inputs like water and fertilizer and pesticides, and it makes it easier to harvest, right? When you grow in monoculture, you can harvest all at once, all at the same time. You can treat with chemicals all at the same time. Farming is backbreaking work, and this eases some of the challenges. But this cheap food comes at a very high cost to the land, to humans, and to non-human beings. And it does not have to be this way. Despite that refrain that industrialized agriculture is the only way to feed the world, for most of the last 20 years, the rate of global food production has actually increased faster than the rate of global population growth. The world produces 1.5 times enough food to feed everyone on the planet, which is also enough to feed the population anticipated by 2050 of 9.6 billion. This feels like a very strange bit of information to people when we see people who are hungry. But I want you to consider this. It is not that we do not have enough food. As a matter of fact, globally, we throw away 30 to 40% of food. It is because people do not have enough money to buy food. And those reasons are also, as you know, myriad. Starting with the fact that many of the people who actually grow, produce, process, and serve food are not paid enough money to feed themselves or to feed themselves well. Now, the reason I mention this is because a lot of the changes that we have seen in food and agriculture have been made in the name of feeding hungry people. But the issue isn't simply that of availability, right? It is one of access. So the seeds of truth that need to be embedded into every conversation we have around agricultural biodiversity, around biodiversity as a whole, when we are told it has to be this way, we have to, compromise this biodiversity. We have to raise these forests. We have to build this traffic way because of progress, because of industry. I want you to keep coming back to the question of who is telling those stories? Where do we need to find sources of new information? What seeds do we need to see and nurture and harvest? Here's what I believe needs to be embedded in every conversation about seeds. That most seeds used to be in the public domain, but in less than a half century, laws and court rulings have made it easier to patent seeds. And ever since then, companies like Syngenta have been patenting seeds modified by their scientists, right, within the corporation. And that prevents farmers from harvesting and planting those seeds the following year. Forest companies now control, this statistic is the one I really want you to carry away, over 60% of industrialized seed. This is an unprecedented level of ownership and control over the plant genetic resources that not only impact the costs and choices for farmers, but impacts and limits how seeds are used and exchanged for seed saving and for investigations led by farmers, public researchers, and independent breeders. Because those who control seeds control food, control medicine, control fiber and fuel, every other facet of our life connected to seed. The refrain that we hear time and again is that the only way to feed our hungry planet is by cultivating these vast monocultures of a small handful of high-yielding plants and other foods. But under this industrialized model, although crop yields have increased and people have been fed, which is absolutely no small feat, the genesis of the Green Revolution was something remarkable. The homogenization of seeds has occurred to such a high degree that the way we now grow food threatens food security. Let me put a finer point on that. Why are we losing biodiversity? Because of deforestation, because of industrialization, because of industrial agriculture. Now, of course, this isn't the only reason. You can flip to the back of my book and you will see a whole list that I put together with a scientist at the Food and Agriculture Organization and with Luigi Guardino from the Global Crop Trust, identifying the major drivers of biodiversity loss and biodiversity change. Sometimes in areas it changes for the better, right? Climate change is not universally making everything terrible, even though we know that is a predominant effect. Some areas that couldn't grow food, as one example, can now grow food, right? So just to say these things are variable. Everything I'm sharing is shifting. There's not one response to everything that's happening in the world at one time. But what I can say with certainty is the homogenization of crops has occurred to such a high degree that the reduction of diversity in both the types of foods, in the variety of foods, in the types of seeds that are sown is dangerous for the exact same reason that a financial expert would say, diversify your holdings. We wouldn't put all of our precious life savings into one stock, right? So why are we doing that with seeds? Why are we doing that with food, where one disease, one pest, the volatility of a changing climate can imperil them all? The way we now grow and raise food is threatening our ability to feed ourselves. But the good news is that the solutions to these challenges are also found in the seed. And it's why conservationists have, past and present, fought so hard to save them, right? It was referenced in the film. Nikolai Vavilov, one of the world's greatest plant explorers, traveled to 64 countries on 5 continents to collect seeds as he developed his theory on the centers of origin of cultivated plants. He launched his efforts back in 1916, and he worked tirelessly until he was arrested in 1940 for holding scientific ideals. This might resonate some who are listening in from the United States, holding scientific ideals that the government opposed. In that instance, it was Stalin. And after a year and a half of eating frozen,
just let you know you've got a few minutes.
Great, thank you. And moldy flour in the Soviet gulag, he died. The man who taught the world about the foundations of food and tried to avert famine died of starvation. His colleagues in Leningrad, now St. Petersburg, at the Vavilov Institute of Plant Industry Research Institute, that safeguards nearly 500,000 seeds, suffered a similar fate, right? Fast forward to the stewards of seeds who have carefully taken the seeds from Syria, stored them in Svalbard, and ensured that we will have access to these seeds for decades to come. These are happening through seed collections, through conservationists, and through farmers who are stewarding seeds and diverse varieties without any credit, predominantly farmers who are smallholders living at the margins in oftentimes extreme poverty. So I urge you to consider, as I close now, the stories of seeds. And I'll share just now images that I would like to leave you with. These were created by a photographer based in the United States who talks about how the stories of seeds are the stories of us. Her name is Svetlana Tepachevich, and she was born and raised in the former Yugoslavia. And what she says is she thinks of seeds as a meditation on the ways that we relate to, I believe I didn't share my screen with you, to seeds in the world. Forgive me. We even practiced this, and now here I am losing the ability to do that with you. So I think I will not do that because now I've completely lost the place where I do, there we go, where I am able to share seeds with you. The stories of seeds, she says, are a meditation on the ways we relate to the natural world. So I'll end here and invite you to consider how the stories of seeds are the stories of us, how seeds change, how they are our life, how they relate to the sustenance of life. And if the stories of seeds are the stories of us, what seeds should we be planting? And how do we sustain the seeds that we want to grow? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Simran. I wasn't sure if you were still sharing your screen, but it's disappeared from my screen.
Can you hear me as well? Okay, yes. Can you all hear me? Yes. Okay,
yes.
Thank you so much for that, Simran. Thank you for a fascinating insight into your work. Thank you for reminding us that seeds are indeed sexy and that they are the story of us, the story, you know, the beginning, as you said, of food, clothes, fuel, medicine. I really liked that you brought up the fact, you know, we have to pay critical attention to biodiversity, and you talked about the issues of access and ownership and control. So thank you very much for joining us, and I know you'll be joining us later in the afternoon.
Apologies for my technical difficulties also. Thank you for bearing with me.
You would have done much better than I would have done, so thank you. So I'm now going to introduce the first session of today's afternoon symposium. I also like to say I was quite emotional seeing the gallery again in the introductory film, as I know myself and the whole of Impressions team actually missed the gallery. So that was a bit of a moment as well. Welcome to this session. I'm Anne McNeill. I'm the director of Impressions Gallery. This session is called Reactivating Archives. It's with Chrystel Lebas and Liz Orton and Miranda, Lowe. So I'm just going to start and I'll introduce Chrystel. I'll just get my notes out. So welcome. Chrystel is a graduate of the Royal College of Art. Her work has been exhibited widely, including at the Scottish National Gallery in Edinburgh, the Photographers Gallery, Palais de Beaux Arts, Paris. Chrystel's work is in both public and private collections, such as the V&A Museum, the Bibliothèque Nationale Paris, and the Wilson Centre for Photographer. Her book, her absolutely brilliant book, I'll just get it here, Field Studies, Walking Through Landscapes and Archives, deservedly won the Chrysler Cross Best Photo Book Prize. So Chrystel, you're going to share the screen, show some work, and you two have 15 minutes. I will give you a 3-minute warning when you're running out of time. Welcome.
Thank you, Anne. Thank you so much. And I'm just trying to share now, share the screen. Thank you for having me. Thank you for organizing the exhibition as well. And I'm so sad I haven't seen it yet, because I was planning on driving with Liz Orton as well, and we just couldn't make it. But hopefully, no, we are not going to be able to make it, maybe before the 12th, but we might see it in Exeter, hopefully. And thank you, Simran, for such an amazing talk, and so vibrant and energical. I've got to follow your energy. Talking in front of the computer is not really great, but we are doing our best. So yes, so I'm just going to kind of take you through the project. I've been working with the Natural History Museum starting in 2011, and so it's a very long project. I was introduced by Birgit Ahrens, who was former contemporary art curator at the museum, to look at a collection of glass plates negatives that were orphaned at the moment that they showed them to me. And I was also introduced to Mark Spencer, who was the former British botanist, the senior curator of the botany area in the museum. And Mark took me, the first time I saw this collection, he took me to the underbelly of the museum. The glass plates were lodged in a filing cabinet on the top, underneath the roof. And so the temperature would fluctuate from -20 to +50 or something like that. And so I asked Mark to take the collection in a kind of more secure place so I could check it, start to work with it. I had no clue what to do with it, basically, but I just thought it would be nice to have a look, because these are photographs depicting, landscapes with annotations. And after 3 months, starting in September and around December, I found the glass plates with the name scratched on it, Edward James Salisbury. When I told Mark, he jumped out of his seat, and he was really excited about it. He said, wow, Salisbury was a very important ecologist of the beginning of the century, the 20th century. And he was also director of Kew Gardens during the war and just a bit after. And so he was a very, very important figure. And at the same time, when I researched the glass plates, we figured out that the notebooks were, part of the Kew Gardens archive. So we don't know what happened to both collections, why they got disconnected, but I got the notebooks to be all the archive, the paper archive, to be moved to the Naturalist Museum, and I could begin the research. And this is Salisbury with his colleagues researching. It's interesting, they all carry this box where they can actually place the plants they found. And very early on, I started working on my own, however, and I started to focus on the Scottish landscape, because I thought, at the time, I didn't know it very well. And I thought, everybody said to me, oh, you should go to Scotland and photograph this amazing amazing landscapes, wilderness, and actually it's a more complex story in Scotland. We know that the landscape has been shaped by the history and extensive farming as well, and politics. And so we receive a funding from the Gulbenkian Foundation, which could allow a botanist, a biologist, Kat Castillo, to travel with me to locate the plants and to locate Salisbury's views with me. So here is her kind of holding one of Salisbury's photographs, and we believe we found the location, but actually it's more complex than that. And we photographed. So I had the idea of traveling to the Salisbury place where he photographed, and we retrace his steps and try to locate the views, and we photograph. And at the time, because the museum is really interested in, of course, environmental change, the idea was to really kind of visit the places and see if we could find the plants or if how the landscape had changed. Like in these photographs that I'm showing at the Impression Gallery, where you see on the top Salisbury, on the bottom Salisbury is looking at this Scirpus maritimus, the plant here, and that you can't find anymore in that area. And I found out later, talking to locals, talking to geographers, talking to other botanists and biologists. I mean, I learned that you can't invent a story. As an artist, we are very good at inventing stories, creating a little narrative around an image. However, in that circumstance, you have to really kind of make sure that you got it right. And yes, so after research, we found out that actually the species had disappeared from this area. So began a long journey into looking at other areas he would have actually looked at. Here you see that on the left, this is the original picture from Salisbury, and the forestation is completely different. So the Forestry Commission had acquired the area in the 1970s and decided to plant spruce, and because it's actually, you know, in terms of monetary, you can make lots of more money with spruce than with oak trees. So these are kind of lots of little changes, huge changes that would actually contribute to the change of the way that we see the landscape. Here, what I found is that Salisbury often, he was not a photographer, he was a scientist using photography for the purpose of illustrating his articles for his book, in his books. And here he was looking at a very close-up moss, type of moss, which is really rare now. And I luckily found it in this rock. So I decided to photograph the species itself and then enlarge to the habitat. So I would use 2D cameras to do that. So you would have the idea of where the species had been found. And talking about the text, I actually added to the work. So this is actually taken from Stace, which is the New Flora of the British Isles, which is a Bible that botanists use in order to find the species they are looking for in the landscape. And it describes the landscape, the habitat, where you would find the species and its composition. Now, below, there is the Salisbury, you know, kind of little explanation of the species, which is a lot more flowery, poetic. His writing is, you know, beautifully, I just like the way that he described the plant and humanized them. So I wanted to use this with the map and as well. So here we are looking at another area of Scotland in the Cairngorm, where you are looking at, he was focusing on different places that had been you know, found, or here in Cairngorm is more, you know, how the park has decided to leave the trees in their own agencies to, okay, there are paths, there is a, you know, a way to go for the public, yet there is a lot also of, you know, quite wild areas in the park. So
sorry, Chrystel, Karsten, you've got 2 minutes. Sorry.
Yeah. Oh, I'm going very quick. So, so, and again, looking for the view. I mean, that was really something that for me was quite interesting. Looking at what is the view, what is the best view? Is it Salisbury's? Is it mine? So I've been kind of fighting with these ideas. And another area in Corbin Forest, again, this area was afforested. And then, you know, starting in the 30s, because before that it was a full moving dune system. And it's interesting because when you see collections, these are ecological photographs from foresters that started to use photography, and also by Robert Moyse Adams, who was a botanist and illustrator as well. So lots of different research on different archives that would give me a clue on what I was looking for in this landscape. And in Corbin, I made a film that was presented at the House Marseille, in the solo exhibition at House Marseille, that shows 4 different views and also narrated by a forester that actually helped me understand the landscape I was looking for. I think I'm going to leave it.
Sorry, Chrystel, I feel so bad. So thank you very, very much for that presentation. Everybody, there will be, I forgot to say, if you have any questions, please put them in the chat and I'll be keeping an eye on them, and I can ask our 3 speakers at the end after they've done all their presentation. Thank you so much, Chrystel. Thank you for presenting the complexities of the Scottish landscape, and thank you for sharing with us your working methods and how you revisited Salisbury work and the changes within the landscape. So thank you. And
it was great to have Liz filmed before, then it kind of probably told more.
So is Liz here?
Hi.
Hi, Liz. Chrystel, sorry, can you stop sharing your screen? Thank you. Hi, Liz. Hi.
Hi.
Welcome. So I'd like to welcome our second speaker this afternoon, who is Liz Orton, who, as you know, is one of the artists in the exhibition. So as well as working on the residency at Kew, which you saw an example of some of the work, Liz is a Mead Fellow at the University of the Arts London. She is the recipient of a Wellcome Trust Arts Award. And this Arts Award is allowing Liz to investigate the social and cultural aspects of medical imaging. Aesthetica magazine selected Liz as one of the next generation's future greats. She's exhibited in various places, including Photo Fusion in London and the Guernsey Photo Festival. As you know, Liz, I will be strict and give you a 3-minute warning.
Thanks,
So,
Anne.
over to you. Thank you.
Thanks, Chrystel, as well. Really interesting to hear the backstory to your lovely work. So I'm going to talk about my work at Kew. Actually, I'm not really going to talk directly about the work. I'm going to talk more about some of the issues arising, maybe ethical issues as well as conceptual issues from being an artist trying to activate scientific archives. So Splitters and Lumpers, which is the first project you saw in the film, is a documentary project. And I'm working with an idea of kind of pre-archival or extra-archival space and a pre-archival time. Because the piles of material that you saw in the images have been collected, but not formally identified or classified or stored in the archive. And if you poke around for long enough in Kew, in some of the old cupboards, you know, you can find this material which for some reason, for various reasons, remains kind of unprocessed. So thinking about this material as being on a sort of archival threshold of some kind, sort of between nature and natural history. This is an example. This is the oldest material I found. It was 120 years old, and it didn't have any names or anything, but you could tell from the newspaper, which was referred to as being from British East Africa, obviously a colonial term, which is something I'm going to come back to. So the physical structure of the archive at Kew spans 6 buildings and 4 stories. And I'm sort of saying this a bit cautiously, but to some degree, it still reflects the original representation, the kind of early idea of a taxonomic order of nature that was proposed in 1758. So yeah, it's more than 250 years old, by Linnaeus, and uses categories of class, family, genus, species and subspecies. And the physical organization of the material, which is sort of 7 million specimens and growing, has to make complete sense, both sort of systematically, so you can find what you're looking for, but also be responsive to the constant stream of new knowledge that's coming in. And sometimes part of the system comes under such strain from new knowledge that a category completely falls apart. And this has to be reflected in the physical reorganization of the archive. Super fascinating. I mean, I think I find fascinating the whole underlying idea that there's an order in nature that's actually amenable to human representation. That to me seems like a sort of act of wild imagination. Anyway, so the other work in the show, which is Herbarium of Extinction, which is still, this is really a work in progress still, but it takes up much more directly the relationship of the archive to environmental change and to kind of climate emergency. And it sort of began as a reimagining of archival material and an attempt to link specimens to the body, but also to ideas of ecological loss and institutional care. And it focuses on plant specimens that are extinct and critically endangered. These are conservation categories, and they completely cut across scientific classification. I mean, you can't turn up to a herbarium and say, can you show me your extinct specimens, because they, knowledge isn't held or organized in that kind of way. Something that's really interested me more and more is the way that kind of the relationship of herbaria to ecology is changing really radically in the last 20 or 30 years. So the first sort of 300 years of collecting in herbaria was really about science, and the emphasis was completely on expanding knowledge by collecting and describing as many plant specimens as possible. But technology is it's really changing this. So one way is the use of ancient DNA extraction techniques, so that scientists can now learn about historical conditions from plant specimens. But I think much more significantly, well, this is totally personal opinion, much more significantly is digitization and digitization technologies. So this involves the mass imaging of specimens and the transcription of specimen information. So, you can see here, so the transcription of dates, locations, plant names, collector names. And once these are digitized, these specimens and labels become a kind of metadata that can be used for kind of calculation and computation. So you get algorithms now identifying sort of patterns over time that generate evidence of environmental change purely from plant records, and in a way that I think is probably impossible from a sort of human embodied perspective. And this evidence is now becoming really important for conservation planning. So the role of herbaria and specimen records are really changing. But I wanted to talk about this a bit more. So this drive to digitize, the tendency, I think, is for these specimens to be treated as a kind of objective form of scientific data. And yet we're all increasingly aware that these specimens are actually a form of colonial data, that has to be addressed, and that this colonial data largely privileges Western and very biological knowledge and suppresses other kinds of knowledge. So looking at this specimen sheet of a now endangered species, and on the right hand side I've expanded the detail in the main sheet so you can see. So we have the original collection date up here of 1870, at the bottom the place where it was collected, which is Bahia in Brazil, the name it was given, Philodendron williamsi. And the Williamsi refers to the collector, who is Charles Williams. And Hook refers to Joseph Hooker, who was the director of Kew at the time and who authored the species description. So I guess this is an example of how plants were and still are named by and for science, and how the binomial system of two Latin names, Philodendron williamsi in this case, become a universal language for nature. I mean, I'm not against science. It's hugely helpful. You know, I can write to a botanist on the other side of the world, using a name to refer to a plant, and we both know what we're talking about, so we can have a productive sort of exchange and communication. But you know, Latin and science is a culturally specific naming system. You know, it's only one way of seeing nature. So what we don't learn from this specimen sheet is that this plant locally is referred to as Mae de Imbe. I'm sorry for any Portuguese speakers. Imbe being a root or liana, and Mae meaning mother. And because the plant is so important, you know, the roots are so important that the whole plant is referred to as the mother of the roots. And it has another name too, Milo de Caboclo. I'm not pronouncing the L because apparently it's not pronounced. Caboclo being a Portuguese Brazilian word, and it describes a person of mixed indigenous and European descent. And this word comes from Caboclo, which is a Tupi word, Tupi now being an extinct language. So we have these kind of layers, this loss of language and a loss of biodiversity, and they're connected. But I think also what comes across is that the local and the indigenous names reflect people's connections to the plants, and they often reflect a view that people and nature are actually one and the same thing. Not two separate things, which is the dominant view, I guess, in science. So other things that are not recorded on this specimen sheet. So the names of all the local informants with plant knowledge who would have been critical and important to helping Williams collect this plant in the first place. That's not recorded, that's lost. That the fruits are a local delicacy, and the roots are used extensively in handcraft and apparently make incredible lampshades because the translucency of the roots creates this beautiful red glow when the light passes through. Also, local craftspeople can distinguish between loads of really closely related species based entirely on how they use the various parts of the plant. So when I was researching this particular species, I read probably about 7 times the sentence, "Scientists have discovered and named 10 new species of philodendron in the Brazilian rainforest in the last decade." So this language of discovery, you know, is still being used, the language which sort of disregards and silences existing knowledge, including existing plant names. So to come back finally to the question about reactivating archives. So my starting point was an ecological one, excuse me, but this has definitely expanded to become a more political form of engagement with the archive, thinking much more about whose knowledge is represented. So I feel like I've become more of a sort of insurgent or an agitator in the archive over time, sort of trying to peel back layers and to sort of reveal gaps and omissions. some time ago, I began actually seeking out non-scientific names. So I'm putting out questions, writing emails to botanists in Asia and South America, Africa. Many local names are actually not written down at all. So they're passed through stories, through bodies, through practices, memories. So there's a lot of false starts and dead ends. And many names,
sorry.
Okay, it's fine. I'm nearly done. So, and many names are not, you know, they're unrecorded, or they're lost now. And mostly I can't really get close enough to find out. But here are a few, probably 12 names here of about 80 that have now been shared with me. So I haven't found a kind of way to represent this yet, or even really to talk about it. So I sort of started thinking about it as a kind of counter archive, or maybe an act of recollection, but I'm not sure. At the moment, I'm thinking about this as more of an exercise in listening and facilitating rather than making. So I finish. I'm happy to just leave the slide up for a while if people want to look through the names. But thank you very much.
Thank you for that, Liz. I thought it was interesting that you're touching on how artists and scientists can work together, you know, and then you're talking about the order in nature and categorizations and institutional care. And I'm really pleased that you brought in those links to colonialism. And then I think a lot of people will have questions, hopefully, around, you know, that's what's recorded and what's unrecorded, you know, the unrecorded local knowledge. And I really like the fact that you brought in, it's about the political engagements with archive, particularly under this section of reactivating the archive. So thank you for that really fascinating talk. And I won't even attempt some of the Latin names and pronunciations. So thank you. I'm now going to introduce our third speaker of today, Miranda. Are you there, Miranda? You will be. Hi. Hi, Miranda. I'm really pleased that Miranda Lowe can join us today on the Seedscapes Symposium and join our exhibiting artists to give us some of her insights. Miranda is Principal Curator and Scientist at the National History Museum in London. Miranda presents lectures on both curatorial research and popular culture, popular science, for such TV channels as diverse as BBC4 and the one that I really like, CBeebies, or is it CBBC? In 2013, Miranda was a finalist in the National Diversity Positive Role Models Award for Race, Religion and Faith. She's the founding member of the very necessary and timely Museum Detox, which is a network for people of colour who work in heritage, museums, galleries, libraries and archives. Miranda is passionate about ensuring representation of women and diversity at all levels in the STEM agenda. Oops, and that's Liz's time running out. I'm sorry. She's passionate about ensuring representation of women and diversity at all levels, as I said, in the STEM agenda. And as we said in our introduction, this week it was announced Miranda was one of the 30 women in the BBC Radio 4 Our Planet Women's Hours Power List. It's a great honour that you're here to talk to us. You two will get the 15 minutes and I'll give you the 3 morning. Okay. Thank you.
Right, I'll just check that my screen is being shared. Oh, let's go. We did rehearse it. Can everybody see that?
No, I can't.
Oh, right. Okay. We did rehearse that, didn't we?
I know all the rehearsals we did.
All right. I'll go back again. And here it is. There we go. To share. Can people see that now? Okay.
Yes, we can see that.
Fantastic. What a belief. Well, I really loved Chrystel and completely loved Liz, your presentation as well, because it feeds so much into mine. So I'll try not to go over too much of the ground that you've set up, but I really want to have a conversation with you, Liz. Brilliant. So I work at the Natural History Museum. I'm a principal curator there. I am, let's say, in the trade, my kind of like baseline job, I'm a marine biologist and a curator of those specimens that relate to the animal environment in terms of the ocean. But in the last, I would say, 10 to 12 years, I have become more a cultural historian and interested in plants and the historical information surrounding those. So what better place to work and to you know, revive the archives such as working at the Natural History Museum in terms of the stories that I feel people should be recognising and hearing and be representative of some of the voices. So, so here are some of, and there are so many, and Liz alluded to and showed a lot in terms of the archival resources that I work with and that I encourage, and I do work a lot with artists. I'm very passionate about that because science can be very, as Liz was saying, you know, with Latinized names, can be very, or seem to people to be very, very complex. And so in terms of me working with artists, it, for me, it gets to reveal a lot more about the scientific work that I do to make it more accessible to the wider public, whether nationally or internationally, in many different ways and forms, because we don't all learn in the same way. And it's really inspiring to work with artists because they also take me sometimes out of my own comfort zone in the way that I work and reveal other ways of looking and seeing things too. So it's absolutely brilliant. So the images on these slides, what you can see here on the top left-hand side, is it's the back end of the museum actually, so everybody obviously comes through the front end, but I work in the Darwin Centre, which is the taller building of the two that is just overshadowing a little bit the Director's Lodge that's sort of at the front facing of the picture. So I work on the 5th floor there, the Darwin Centre. And so I see the whole building, the whole institution as a massive archive for me and for others with sub-departments of archives essentially. So the archive data that I use and I have access to, you can see at the bottom half of that image there on the left-hand side, are card indexes, traditionally used and created in the museums, not so much now because we're all going online and more digitally. But a really important source and can often get left behind in terms of the information that you're looking for, because often these cards are not scanned yet because there are so many priorities to scanning. But you know, such annotations and really interesting name-changing information in terms of plants, scientific names as well as common names written on those card indexes. Also, at the top right-hand corner, you can see a collection of corals. So I also look after a coral collection. But what's really important here is looking at the data and the information on the labels. The different styles of labels give you an insight, and the handwriting, the different handwriting. So over time, I've worked at the museum for about 29 years now. Over time, I've got to recognise different people's handwriting, so that if on the label it doesn't particularly say the name at that point in time, but because of that memory bank that I have, that I can recognise, oh, that label was written by such and such at that, or it gives an indication of a period of time, and also the style of the label. So that's really important when you're accessing material. And what you can see in the bottom right-hand corner is a herbarium. And what's interesting about this herbarium is not a plant herbarium, although the Victorians would have considered these animal groups, so they're called hydroids, and this herbarium is the only one that I've got for the main collections that I look after is there, but it's preserved in the same way as a traditional plant herbarium would be. And so that's all, again, a wealth of information in there. And as Liz was saying as well, is that one curator can never have enough time to actually tease out all the information in there, but it's for curators as part of their role to kind of open up. I consider myself an advocate for archives continually, so we can share this information, give people greater insight into the world that they're living in, what was before, what is now, and how we are going to preserve and get people inspired and to care about the natural world, the plants, you know, that are part of everything on a global scale. So one of the archives I chose to revisit is concerning this beautiful ceiling in the central hall at the Natural History Museum. Many of us may have, you know, visited the museum and being unaware, never looked up, or maybe have wondered why when they did look up or visit the top half of the second floor balconies, what this is all about. And it's a huge, beautiful, we call it the, gosh, I've even forgotten now that I'm saying it, the gilded canopy, which comes from a book that was written in 2005 by one of our senior botanists called Sandy Knapp. And so the gilded canopy, this great hall at the museum, those panels are part of around 162 ceiling panels with botanical illustrations, really beautiful, very artistic, very ornate. And in 2007, many institutions were commemorating the abolition of the transatlantic slave trade. And at that time, or throughout that year, lots of organizations were putting on various events and consulting varying communities that, you know, have a cultural heritage and history with a lot of these plants, and in terms of the colonialism that as was at that point in time over 200 years ago. And the museum created a really wonderful document, and you can all find this online, called Slavery in the Natural World. That document was produced, it's a 10-chapter document. It was produced from you know, source communities coming in, people from the African and Caribbean communities and heritage, myself as a curator and of that heritage as well was involved, and other curators that actually look after the specimens that relate to the ceiling and other artifacts. That document was amazing, and I remember reading that, and there were a couple of stories that really resonated with me. So a decade or more later, one particular story still stuck with me, and I wanted to tease out that story a lot more. And it involved taking one of these ceiling panels, so this is some pictures here, of a plant called Quassia amara. And that ceiling panel is just up on the second floor of second floor balcony at the museum in the central hall, outside or near the section of the giant sequoia. And this plant, and you can see there are two other images here, one in real life and one a more dissected traditional botanical illustration. And this plant was discovered by this person, Gorman Quasi. You can see the varying alliterations of his name. And I remember when I first discovered this story, I thought, this is amazing. This story needs to be told, and to recognize this person of color, because often you don't hear about these kind of stories. These stories are lost, hidden, on purpose or not on purpose. It's just because at that particular time for Gorman Quasi, he was enslaved as a child and was brought to Suriname. Later on in his life, he became a freedman, but what is really important to recognize here, that he was not able to write his own story, to tell his own story. He only told to those European naturalists that came to explore, and also there were, so Suriname at the time in the 1700s was colonized by the Dutch, so it's a Dutch colony. But for Gorman Quasi, he had discovered a lot of botanical and medicinal botanical properties of varying plants. And Kwasi Amara was one of them. And so I, over the last couple of years, have chosen to highlight that story and actually present it in a lot more detail. So I've actually written a paper with my co-author, Sabad Glass, who works at UCL. And our paper is about, well, it's entitled Nature Read as Black and White. And it talks about, you know, some of the erasure, the scientific racism, but also that we should be acknowledging a lot more these kind of hidden histories, these cultural histories. Liz spoke about, you know, oral histories are just as valuable as scientifically and written down histories as well. So out of that body of work that I've done, kind of revealing how Graman Kwasi, he actually was known in Suriname as a healer and as a botanist, and healed not only the indigenous peoples in Suriname, both black and white, the Dutch colonialists. He's slightly controversial because he fought against the local Maroons in Suriname alongside the Dutch, and he was rewarded for that. So the previous picture that I showed you, that is, he got an accolade through the Hague, and so he is dressed in a very European way to acknowledge that status at that point in time. But what he did, he sold the recipe of that plant, Kwasi Amara, because it was boiled, and a lot of plants at that point in time, they use the expression of a bitter tea, but that particular plant was boiled into a bitter tea, and often anybody that had a fever, it was used to reduce the fever, or also to get rid of intestinal parasites. That recipe was sold to a student of Carl Linnaeus, and I think Liz or maybe Chrystel mentioned Carl Linnaeus, known as in the science circles as the godfather of taxonomy. So his classification of plants and animals became very popular, and this student took the recipe and samples of that plant back to Europe into the hands of Carl Linnaeus, where he named the plant in honor of Graman Kwasi, which is absolutely wonderful. But also what you need to recognize that Carl Linnaeus went on to publish scientifically about the properties of that plant, and eventually, and we still use elements and the chemicals derived from that plant today in the pharmaceutical industry. So as well as writing that paper that I did, I'm really passionate about information being really accessible. So my original publication on this work is not in an entirely high-end scientific paper. It's been published by the Natural Sciences Science Collections Association, and has been in the last couple of months while we've been in lockdown, being picked up by a lot of people because of Black Lives Matter and everything. And I would never have thought that it would have been used in that way. But being published in a more accessible publication, everybody has been able to download it and read those stories and build on it now. And so as part of my my way of extending and being more accessible with these kind of stories and highlighting to other people that they can do the same, working with artists and archivists, I developed a tour, and you can see there's a little tweet there from the tour where people actually want to know this kind of stuff. And with us telling this stuff in any which way to express it, it gets people to understand about the plants, about the hidden histories, and how we should care, and what effects we have on the world, on the plants, as has been mentioned.
Sorry.
Yeah. I am actually finishing now. Thanks, Anne. So, and other artists, this is one of my favorite artists that I have had the pleasure of working with over the summer when we were allowed to just meet a little bit. I think it was in 6 at the time, but she had a wonderful village. Joy Gregory had an exhibition, passionate about plants, and she has visited our Sloane Herbarium at the Natural History Museum, and I would like to be working with her alongside many other artists going forward. And she had a brilliant outdoor exhibition called Invisible Life Force of Plants. And again, it's why plants are really important to us, our culture, our histories, and our survival. Thank you.
Thank you, Miranda, and it's so good to see Joy's wonderful face on the screen. I worked with Joy in Impressions. We worked with her a few years ago in our first ever retrospective of her work. Yeah, so it's wonderful to see Joy. It's like she's in the room with us. Anyway, there's a few points that I really enjoyed. Well, I enjoyed a lot of all of your talk. I like the fact that you're saying it's about conversations and questions, which we're about to open up to all the attendees at the symposium. I was also really glad to hear that you like being taken out your comfort zone. Artists. I liked it was really good what you began and the insights you gave around the ornate gilded canopy, was it? Yeah. Quasi Amiras and Garman Quasi's the whole story about that, and scientific racism and the importance of stories. And one thing that really resonated at the end, that what you were talking about is all this work and everything that you're working on, it's, you know, putting it out there and making it being accessible. That's like a thing that's very dear to all of us at Impressions. So that was another great insight that you've brought. I've been trying to keep an eye on the chat while listening to everyone's presentations. So forgive me if some of them I've missed. Oh, someone said Miranda, Alicia Bruce said, Miranda, that was beautiful. So there you go. There was one question that I did catch. It's quite complicated, having to try and do all these things. Pippa, do you want to say what your question was? Because I wrote it down, but I've lost it now.
I will, if I can remember what it was. Yeah, my question was about kind of what are the insights to be gained from artists working with other specialists, whether they're curators or scientists or botanists, and perhaps vice versa.
Can everybody?
Is that too anyone in particular?
Who? What?
Do you want me to repeat? Shall I repeat that question?
Yes.
Yes.
I'll start my video and you can see me. It was about, yeah, it was just really asking about, you know, what insights can be gained by artists working in collaboration with other specialists outside the arts. So working with scientists or botanists or curators and archivists, what insights, what benefits can there be?
Can I say? I worked with scientists before, with a biologist in Croatia, and it kind of gave me lots of insights, more in-depth knowledge of the places I would study. And I think at the Naturalist Museum and Kew Gardens, when I worked with scientists there, it was quite, and especially with Mark Spencer at the Naturalist Museum. Miranda knows Mark. Yes. And it's so generous with his time, so passionate about his subject. And really, we worked so well together. We never had any conflict of interest or anything like that. You know, it was so seamless, you know, kind of working together. And that's what really I take from it. I've heard other artists that worked in a kind of scientific way and they didn't have the same experience somehow. So it can also be complex. You don't want to infringe on people's times. So you have to be a bit careful, but, and also it's such an exciting place to be. And I was kind of enjoying just sitting there and having all these scientists kind of doing things around me and wondering what they were doing, looking through a microscope or what they were looking at. And I got so distracted a lot of the time, but I think it's, I hope it's mutual as well. I hope that artists can also highlight certain reactivating archive is a very interesting notion. And we spoke about that as well when I was at the Naturalist Museum, is that the archive of Salisbury was dormant and didn't, you know, and there are so many, Liz is talking about, you know, herbariums that are dormant. Nobody is doing anything with it. It's just so vast.
Thanks, Chrystel, because there's now quite a lot of questions coming in, and I think there's a couple that given the experience around this table, I was going to say around my screen. So someone has asked, Nima has asked, following Pippa's question, did the panel have advice of artists approaching scientists and ecologists with the intention of developing interdisciplinary projects? So what advice? Because as an artist, it can be intimidating when you're scoping a project, but unsure of how exactly you can collaborate with a practitioner from another discipline. So guys, do you have any advice on how to approach?
I'm happy to say something.
Yep.
I totally agree with you. It can feel really intimidating. It's easy to feel like that, you know, the other person's the expert and you don't know anything. I think not knowing anything is a real advantage. Because you don't take anything for granted and you don't come with the assumption. So actually what happens is you might see things differently. You know, in terms of how you start approaching someone, I think that the best way is actually to go to the place you're interested in as a visitor. You know, most archives have a front end, and to find something, it can just be a hook initially that you feel speaks to the thing that you're interested in, and then find out, you know, who the relevant curator is for that object or that image or that collection, and write to them directly. So I think you probably won't get anywhere if you write a general email to an entire institution. I would find something specific, a point of engagement, and then approach an individual, and then I would begin to, if you like, kind of conceptualize or map out a kind of dialogue that might then become a project, and then later you might get the funding. It's very thin. The question that somebody else posted about, are there published kind of funded residencies? In my experience, no. And thank you, Miranda, for shaking.
I know. I
Good to hear from Miranda's side as well.
Yeah, good to hear. Yeah.
But just in response to Liz, I mean, yeah, I was saying no, because that's what I struggle with as well, because I'm really passionate about engaging with artists and different people about things, and then I see lots of things that people haven't touched for years in the museum, and I think this will make such a great project, or an artist does approach me about something and asks, oh, is there any in-house funding? And there isn't, and then that's so deflating for me. It's like, oh, can't get them in to make this alive again, to share it with everyone. I mean, at the Natural History Museum a few years ago now, probably about 8 years ago, we used to have an Arts and Humanities Research Centre. We had Birgit, I know Birgit very well, and I really loved working with Birgit too. I love working with people like that. Yeah, so I think the kind of, for museums in general, the structure in the way to try and engage with artists needs to change, and how, because often there are lots of, because sometimes if you approach a particular scientist about your inquisitive, or you want to do this project, or you've seen something in the gallery and you want to know more, often curators might not reply because they don't have that, you know, time. They have a lot of other things that they have to do, but also the environment that we work in is not made easy for us to engage. So we often think, oh gosh, we're gonna have to go through so many hoops just to get this person through the door to do something. So there's constraints in many ways, and it can get better. And the more we talk and discuss about this and see this also, because I see it as part of my job. So for me, it's all embedded in everything that I do. I see exciting stuff. I'm privileged enough to work with collectors all the time. So whenever I talk or I meet people, I say, oh, well, send me an email. It does give me a lot of work to do, because I get involved in things that have nothing to do with me specifically, but then I know somebody else who I could talk to and kind of get them to come around to my way. So yeah, but I wanted to say about the benefits of working with you all as artists and things in terms of the scientists. As Liz says, it gets me to see things in a different way, but it gets me to see the things that I may have taken for granted and was not aware of. the shape and form of something. I look at detail, but I might just be always looking at it in a scientific way. So to just get that revelation in another way just opens it up and so many more stories around it. And it gets me excited about a collection I always work with all the time. To show it to someone is exciting, rather than me sitting in a collection store on my own. Anyway,
sorry, I'm very conscious of the time.
Yeah.
So someone else, Ed, had asked that question about are there any grants or residencies. So if anybody knows anything, just please put it in. You know, there isn't a definitive list anywhere, but if anyone's got knowledge or who they might, you know, approach, like the Wellcome Trust or things like that, just put it in the chat. There was one other question, which is, I think it's quite a long one, that we could keep it for the final session, if that's okay. But I want to read it out because it is an interesting one, from someone called Gary McLeod.
Yeah.
Right, so question for the panel. How do each of you feel about the term reactivate? Doesn't it suggest or assume that the items in the archive are frozen or paused until someone comes along and unpauses them? Doesn't that in some way deny the specimens, archival photographs as agency? And then he says, forgive me if that doesn't make sense. It's very late here. So it's just something to think about that we could maybe wrap up at the final session, except Liz has got her hand up. Yes, go for it.
No, I'm just saying it's a really good question, I think.
All right, that was a thumbs up. Yeah. So thank you again, Chrystel, Miranda.
Sorry, may I respond to that briefly, that question? So seeds are, when they are archived, they are frozen in time. That's known as ex situ conservation. That's why we also must keep them in the soil. We also must keep them in our lives, actively reaching for these diverse seeds and plants, because when we only keep them in one place and think of them as something outside of ourselves, which so brilliantly shared by Miranda and Liz and everyone, they become something that we're disconnected from. And then when we lose them, we don't realize how, like, we've lost a part of ourselves.
Great, thank you, Anne. And that's a good way to wind up and everybody to go for our tea breaks, coffee breaks, dinner breaks, depending where you are. And we'll see you all back here. Going to start at 4 o'clock prompt, so you can start coming back in, you know, just a few minutes before 4. So once again, I just want to thank everybody, Chrystel, Simran, Miranda and Liz, for a fantastic first session to this symposium. Thank you.
Thanks, Anne.
Hi, I'm Liz Wells, and I'm delighted to be moderating the second panel today, which is on seeding change, though I think we've already touched on a whole number of relevant issues and questions already in the first half of this afternoon. And I do want to thank you all, Simran, Chrystel, Liz and Miranda, for a fantastic discussion. I've been sitting here really enjoying it, and also thinking, Liz, and more particularly Chrystel, I mean, I've been working with you for something like 12 years and you still manage to tell me things that I don't know. It's absolutely wonderful. So, you know, it just shows the value of collaboration and continuing to work together on issues of interest to all of us. And on that note, I'm going to introduce the first speaker for this afternoon, who I have also been working with for a very long while, who is Heidi Morstang. Heidi has worked with moving image photography and experimental documentary for more than 20 years. She has exhibited her photographic work and screened her films internationally, most recently at the International Science Film Festival, St. Petersburg, Russia, Krakow Film Festival, Poland, Royal Norwegian Embassy, London, Museo de Arte Contemporáneo in Santander, Cantabria, Spain, and the Science Museum, London. Her work is represented in numerous private and public collections, and she is also an associate professor at University Plymouth, UK, where I am also associated. So Heidi, if you would like to share your screen, and I am going to press the start button on my phone, which in 12 minutes time will ring to give you a 3-minute warning.
Thank you very much, Liz. I'm going to, can you see this?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. So I'm going to start with this. So, well, thank you all. I think it's quite extraordinary that we can meet this way. And as Chrystel said, I haven't been to Impressions to actually see the work in the gallery, which I'm really sad about, but I think is really important and incredible work that Impressions and the team have done to make this happen also because art is hugely important, especially in really difficult times as we are dealing with now. So, as Liz said, I work with documentary approaches in film and photography, and I primarily work with landscape. And today I'd like to talk about some concerns regarding the work I made in the high Arctic that are exhibited in Seedscapes. Preparing for today, these are reflections that I made in response to traveling to these places, and because we are dealing with a global pandemic, that we are encountering restrictions. And first of all, thanks to Simran for giving the context to seed collections and the Svalbard Global Seed Vault. As an artist, I'm interested in how human intervention in landscape takes place in order to advance knowledge about our shared environment. I take part in interdisciplinary expeditions to unfamiliar terrain, and I use photography and film to seek an understanding of time, history, and the significance of our environment and ecological concerns. And mostly I travel quite far to make work, such as the Arctic, and most recently to Sierra Nevada in California. And I wanted to make a film about the Svalbard Global Seed Vault in the high Arctic, which archives duplicates of food crop seeds for future generations. I also wanted to film the ecologically fragile landscape of the high Arctic, where the vault is located, and observe human interventions of mining, transport, and global seed storage. I'm interested in geopolitics, and the Svalbard archipelago is of global interest. So, the sound artist Max Eastley, he went to the Arctic in 2004 as part of the Cape Farewell expedition, and he made the following observation. I couldn't say that art will solve everything. It won't solve anything, but there has to be a kind of amalgamation of everybody all looking in the same direction. First, you have to convince people that climate change is happening. Second, what can we do about it? And finally, how long have we got? And go back. This is the yearly seed delivery into the vault when I filmed. And so what Max Eastley is saying, what relevance does this have to do with the work I do? Why intervene with an artistic approach and not a scientific approach? For me, film and photography is used as a particular expression and language, as scientists, writers, painters, and philosophers use their disciplines as expression. As we're in a time where there is a climate emergency we need to deal with, my focus is on portraying landscape as a protagonist where humans are visitors. Through these works, I try to reverse the hierarchical structure of humanity's dominance of a landscape, and my drive is also for a love of nature. I wish we will all have a healthy and sustainable ecosystem for our future generations. So the environmentally fragile high Arctic is a region that has attracted many scientists, artists, and filmmakers to make work. And David Buckland said in 2006, also part of the Cape Farewell expeditions, that in the high Arctic it is possible to witness just how fast the ice is melting. and the balance of our planet is changing. So why am I here to make a film? And that became a really important question for me. There is a moral and ethical question about filmmaking in remote regions. The time, effort, logistics, costs all contribute to the question, why should I go there to make a film? Why should I travel so far? As a personal point of view, I find it problematic of adding to the impact of climate change or leaving my footprints. But I also think it is artists' role in society to contribute to an understanding of our current serious concerns, with the aim that our works can contribute to advancing knowledge. If our works can facilitate a space for people to reflect and think, and hopefully take positive action, then it may be worth it. I would like to tell an anecdote from one of my experiences in Svalbard, and that's the anecdote of the flying paper. And this is a photograph I made when I was in Svalbard, and I wanted to capture the very rapid light changes around the time of sunrise. I wanted to observe how these rapid light changes responded to analog film. And this is the high Arctic. The climate change is seen, it's touched, heard and felt. Some people say the Arctic is our canary in the coal mine, where the first signs of climate change appear. And visiting this unique landscape, I felt I should not leave an imprint there, as I was intruding in a very fragile place. So I changed the roll of film in the camera, and as I was handling the film, a tiny piece of paper was caught in the wind. And that was really upsetting, because I couldn't catch it due to the strong winds. So I had left a mark, and that little piece of paper has drifted with the winds, with sea currents, and has probably ended up somewhere. So somehow Svalbard places the human in relation to nature, and is a stark reminder of how we have exploited nature globally. The fragility of the Arctic is very tangible. So although I feel privileged I have visited the region, I also feel uneasy about it. Was my visit worthwhile to such a unique place? So despite leaving my footprints in this fragile territory, the hope is that the film and the photographs in the exhibition can contribute to an understanding of our shared environment and how we can strive towards positive changes in the times we live in, and also being responsible for future generations. So therefore, the physical imprint of my visit has also resulted in an imprint of time in the form of the photographs and the film. And during the last months, the world is experiencing a different way of living due to the pandemic that has affected the entire world. We cannot travel as we used to. And the reflections we can ruminate upon is how we can make a change. Perhaps we cannot travel to such remote and fragile locations to make our artworks and films. Perhaps that is unsustainable. But how can we tell the stories by taking ethical responsibility? And that will be a crucial question for future practice. And when I was filming Prosperous Mountain, I didn't only want to portray the seed delivery. I also wanted to include aspects of environmental challenges and geopolitical interests in the region. For example, Prosperous Mountain has a scene of a blue truck reversing onto a coal tip in a white mountainous terrain. The sound is accentuated through an uncomfortable crescendo until it is silenced when the coal is dumped onto the tip. The coal disperses into the air as a black cloud. As a method of audio intervention, silence is used to accentuate the lament of the mountain. Coal dispersing as an environmentally challenging act. So when filming Prosperous Mountain, the feeling of humbleness when entering the seed vault is an important reminder. This human-made construction is made in order to safeguard humanity for the foreseeable future. It is a storage facility for food crop seeds from the entire world. The seeds can be planted again if there should be a need. And entering the vault and hearing the silence in this tunnel was a sobering experience. Based upon an altruistic idea, it is possible to work towards a sustainable future. However, more pragmatic work is needed. At least the vault is a reminder it is possible to achieve. So I would like to end this presentation by showing an image, which is an electron micrograph from the series Ringhorndalen. And after I filmed Prosperous Mountain, I wanted to work with seeds from Svalbard itself. I was intrigued that plants could grow in such a barren and cold climate. I knew a collection of native flora seeds was stored in the seed vault, the only flora collection in the vault. So I contacted the researcher at the University Center in Svalbard, and she sent me a pack in the post with 16 samples of Arctic flora seeds. I wanted to see if we could still see landscapes inside these tiny seeds that resembled the terrestrial landscape of the valley where they were collected. So I sliced the seeds and prepared them for the electron microscope. And what emerged were images of landscapes that resembled extraterrestrial landscapes. And they appeared timeless, imaginary, and an image of macrocosm within microcosm, of connecting the epic with the minuscule. And for me, they are reminded of an interconnectedness in nature. So what can art do? As I know is Liz's key question in this.
3 minutes.
Yeah, I had one line left, I think, two lines. So what can art do? One of the greatest things is that it can open a poetic space for reflection, and we can access knowledge and perspectives in a different way than accessing other materials such as scientific data in a written form. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Heidi. That was, again, raises all sorts of ethical questions that I think we can come back to at the end of this panel. I want to move straight on and introduce Dornith Doherty, who has an MFA in photography from Yale University and is, or was, a 2012 Guggenheim Foundation Fellow. Her work has been exhibited widely, including Amon Carter Museum of American Art, Fort Worth, Texas, Blue Coat, Liverpool, England, Museum Belvedere, Herenveen, Netherlands, and Museum of Photography, Rafea, Argentina. She has a book of the work that's in the exhibition, which is called Archiving Eden, and is available by online via the Impressions Gallery bookshop. And also her new work, Atlas of the Invisible, opens at Holly Johnston Gallery later on today. Long day, Dornith. I don't know if you're going to talk about that now, but I'm sure we will all want to go to the Holly Johnston Gallery website and have a look after your talk. So over to you, Dornith.
Thank you, Liz, and thanks for the mentioning that I have an exhibition opening this afternoon, which is pretty funny to have everything, the confluence of events. And I've been struck by just how wonderful this symposium has been today, and how interesting all the talks have been, and the interconnectedness of the speakers in terms of our interests, but also our experiences. The exhibition, which I won't be showing any work from today, is Atlas of the Invisible, looks at the invisibility of climate change through kind of making visible micro collisions with minute particles of pollution that float in the air and then the inhabitants of the air. So there's scanning electron microscope images like Heidi, but of course manipulated quite a bit, that are dust encounters and micro collisions between dust and butterflies, but also primarily birds. So it's video and really large scale works. I made a 10-foot, which is what, 3.5 meter print for the show. So it's been kind of fun to do that all while in pandemic and lockdown. So I'm going to get started with my talk, and I'm going to stay within the time, I promise. But thank you for setting your timer, Liz. And I'm going to share my screen now. So here we go. Can everybody see it okay?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, great, thanks. So, like so many speakers today, I'm starting as my starting point with Svalbard, but I'm only going to show a couple of images from it because I knew that Svalbard would have a huge presence in our talk today. And my project on seed banks has taken me to 5 continents and about 20 seed banks around the world. So I began archiving Eden in 2008 as a way to explore the role of seed banks and their preservation efforts in the face of climate change and the extinction of natural species. The simultaneously optimistic and pessimistic nature of Svalbard is compelling. Individuals, on one hand, you have individuals and scientists and governments from around the world that are collaborating to create the first truly global botanical backup system. But also the gravity of climate change and political instability has created the need for an inaccessible doomsday vault near the North Pole. So as I started, I discovered a complex web of philosophical, political, and economic issues surrounding these large-scale collections relating to control of one of the world's most basic resources. The result of this ongoing investigation are 2 deeply entwined body of works, Archiving Eden and Archiving Eden, the Vaults. So this is, these are made with view cameras and digital stitching. I switched halfway through. This project's been since 2008 and it's ongoing. And I started out with a view camera and ended up with stitching them together digitally. This is an antique seed collection in Australia. So the highly detailed documentary images reveal not only the spaces and technological interventions required to store seeds and clones in a state of suspended animation that the average citizen cannot see, but also small details that refer to more intangible aspects of seed banking. Ecological profiles, international trade routes, and the interconnectedness of political and environmental histories are all revealed. For example, in this image from the Herbarium at the Vavilov Institute, you can see potato plants collected in Peru for crop improvement breeding program in Russia. And this is only a few decades after the devastating potato blight in Ireland caused widespread famine, which of course ties into so many people who've spoken already today, the archive, the herbarium, as a kind of center point for these kinds of histories. Researching, photographing, and collaborating with scientists at many of the most comprehensive seed banks in the world expanded my perspective on the scientific concerns involved in the management of natural resources and the role of humans in their depletion and preservation. This is from the Lady Bird Johnson Wildflower Center in Texas. That was the first place I photographed at. And they were working with the British Millennium Seed Bank to collect dryland flora to be shipped both to the Millennium Seed Bank, the US National Bank in Fort Collins, and Svalbard. So how do we choose which plants have been saved? That's a really interesting question that many panelists have already posed. And how are resources allocated? An estimated 30% of native plant species in the US are considered at risk of extinction. And yet plants as a whole receive less than 5% of the funding for all species that the Endangered Species Act that was passed in 1973 provided funding for. So different plants have different collection policies, from trying to save all plant species, both wild and cultivated, to preserving only those that are economically important. And so this is the US Bank, and the previous one was from the Millennium Seed Bank in England. One aspect of this dual project was deeply influenced by my collaboration with scientists. At several of the banks, the scientists allowed me to use their X-ray imaging technology to make digital images of their research and study specimens. The scientists also influenced my choice of which banks to include in the project, as well as which species I might want to take a closer look at. Corn is one example of a species that is critically important now because it's used for so many products in this kind of industrialized agricultural landscape, from forage for animals to food for humans to even food to fuel and plastics. And of course, it co-evolved with humans since the beginning of agriculture. Using X-rays allowed me to focus on some of these more intangible concerns that I mentioned before. The monumental scale of our planet's change and how that affects even the tiniest seeds over time. Seed banking is an endeavor in which time is deeply interwoven. Rare seeds have been collected way in the past, and they're preserved for a future that will occur long after our current era. So in this one, it's interesting. This is kind of a portrait. It makes reference, of course, to botanical illustration, but it's a portrait of the way that, it's a portrait of Texas, in that it has pecans. You can see pecans here, and teosinte, which is the ancestor of corn, which is still collected. And of course, that looks nothing like the corn we know today. Mesquite, and then eucalyptus, to refer to kind of the trade in botanical specimens and knowledge. My engagement with multiple vaults has been profoundly moving. At each one, as I crossed the threshold, I recognized the moment, at that moment of entry, that I have the privilege of capturing a fertile and biodiverse archive of life. And if you think about it, each of these seed banks may be some of the most biodiverse spots remaining on our planet. The work of scientists has made me consider that even though we may want to stop time, it's impossible to do. So they are trying to establish a state of suspended animation in the plants to make them last for 200 years or more. And of course that you don't ever get complete stasis in a living thing. So it led me to make lenticular prints, which are still images that continue to change. And this image, if we weren't in lockdown, you'd be able to see it in person. This is corn seedlings at the exhibition. And you can see that it changes from green to brown to yellow, which refers to the drying process central to the methodology for saving seeds. These images were inspired by the contemplation of time within, the framework of past and future and the desire to stop it. But they're also these are these are traditional inkjet prints that are quite large in the exhibition, but they're also oftentimes shown as lenticular images that change from blue to green. And they're inspired by this notion of this kind of magical archive, or the spark of life that's preserved in these collections, but they're also influenced by the historical practice of natural history collections and cabinets of curiosities. So these in particular were inspired by an image I saw of a cabinet of curiosity that was discovered that had belonged to Sir Alfred Russel Wallace. So these collections were made as an attempt to understand the world. And these collections, which are at Svalbard, were made a century later to save it. And one of the questions that when we were talking about what to talk about in this panel particularly was the notion of advocacy. Do we see ourselves as activist artists? And you know, when I started this project, I did not see it as a way of entering into a dialogue with environmental activism. I'm very interested in landscape and environmental stewardship, which is the lens through which I make most of my work. But I was very surprised to see how that people reacted to my work as activism. And as I reflected, I could see that by posing really open-ended questions with my work, it invited contemplation about the issues at hand. And that, as Heidi so eloquently said, that the poetic space, I'm reading a little note I took, for the poetic space from reflections that allow you to contemplate these really serious issues. Everyone wants to try to, you know, help with climate change, of course. And sometimes the scope of the problem seems too big for individual action to really matter. And I had encountered these stories again and again and again of hope, of like species surviving against the odds. And when I was invited to participate, this image is from an artist residency I had that was between the Ontario Science Centre and the Museum of Contemporary Art in Toronto this past year. And so I had an artist residency there, and I decided to experiment with a more direct way of social engagement with this. And I started by thinking about how many seeds it takes to save a single species, which okay, thanks, is about 5,000 seeds. So I made a seed vault that I made a metaphoric seed vault that would be covered with 5,000 images of seeds that over the course of the exhibition were given away. And in conversation with volunteers, audience members would get to choose what seed they would take, which image they would take, and they would replace it with an actual glassine envelope of a seed. And they had a choice that it could be a Canadian seed, a native Canadian seed, or an agricultural seed. And over the course of the exhibition, the photographic seed bank would be replaced with an actual bank. So I was excited to bring the ability to bring things I'd found to be already powerful factors in my work, conversation with scientists, thinking through discussion, and the consideration of choice in a really direct way. So by allowing visitors to build a community seed bank that would be donated to the Toronto Botanical Garden Seed Library, they would go back into the community itself. And visitors could participate in individual aggregate actions that in aggregate could really affect the future of the planet. So thank you.
Thanks very much, Dornith. I think that the whole thing about engaging an audience, not just conceptually, but actually physically in a haptic manner, is really, really important, and maybe something we can come back to. But I'd like, first of all, to move on to our final speaker, Sant Khalsa, who got up very early this morning in California to join us. So thanks, Sant, for that. Sant has exhibited internationally in over 175 exhibitions and is represented in museum collections, including the Los Angeles County Museum of Art, Center for Creative Photography in Tucson, Arizona that is, and Nevada Museum of Art, as well as in private and corporate collections in the US and Europe. Her work has featured in a whole range of publications, and she has lectured extensively, including at the Getty Center, Los Angeles County Museum of Art, Center for Creative Photography in Tucson, and American Photography Institute at New York University. She is the inaugural recipient of the Society for Photographic Education Inside Award, which was first awarded in 2012, which is awarded for significant contributions to the field of photography. And interestingly, of all the artists in the show, she's the one who describes herself on her website as artist and activist. So Sant, welcome.
Thank you so much, Liz. Can everyone hear me? Yes, great.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen. Let's hope that this all works well. Is that seen? Yes? Okay. Hello, everyone. I am joining you from Joshua Tree, California, grateful to live on the ancestral land of the Serrano, Chemehueve, and Cahuilla people. I am an eco-feminist artist and activist whose work has centered on complex environmental issues, including forests and watersheds for 4 decades. I will speak to you today about my integrated practice and collaborations. Not moving ahead here, there we go. Photographing is an integral part of my art and meditation practice, being still, alert, and present in a moment of mindful observation. It is a means of investigating, interpreting, and expressing my experiences and ideas about the place I call home. My artworks are intended to create a contemplative space where one can sense the subtle and profound connections between themselves, the natural world, and our constructed landscapes. In addition to photographs, I create installation and sculptural works with the goal of engaging my audience in as an active participant rather than a passive observer in the art experience. I see this as an effective means of conscious raising and activism. In his best-selling book, The Hidden Life of Trees, Peter Wallenben argues that to save the world's forests, we must first recognize that trees are, quote, wonderful beings, end quote, with innate adaptability, intelligence, and the capacity to communicate with and heal other trees. I would add that we need to acknowledge our dependency on trees, providing us with oxygen, the life force of the breath. Also, trees' extraordinary ability to store carbon, hold water, stabilize the soil, and give life to the world's wildlife. Trees appear within much of my photographic work over the decades as the central subject, critical companion to water in my extensive project on the Santa Ana River and watershed, or the foundation of a natural or human-altered environment. My photo work on the Santa Ana River was informed by personal experiences living most of my life in the watershed, working alongside the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers while photographing the building of the Seven Oaks Dam on the river, and in my work with the Water Resources Institute at California State University, San Bernardino, where I taught art for 3 decades. The Institute was founded by myself and colleagues in the natural health and information sciences to research and tackle critical and complex water issues in the inland region of Southern California. Additionally, I was a member of the Water in the West Project, a large-scale photographic collaboration addressing water issues in the Western United States. Through the 1990s, I'd worked with an extraordinary group of photographers, including Mark Klett, Terry Evans, Robert Dawson, Peter Goen, Sharon Stewart, and others, as well as a number of water experts investigating a wide range of topics related to the use and abuse of water in the American West. We felt that bringing our individual perspectives, visions, and regional projects together formed a more powerful message. Project exhibitions and publications were educational, thematic, and issue-focused rather than art-focused. This unique approach and experience expanded my understanding of water and land issues and my visual vocabulary. The Water in the West archive can be found at the Center for Creative Photography in Tucson. I often refer to the Santa Ana River as my river, not to allude to ownership or control, but rather with respect to the intimate relationship one develops over time as with a dear friend. The river runs through me and serves as a source of vital sustenance for my body, mind, and creative spirit. This personal realization that an intimate connection with nature is the foundation of my activism. I create artworks to inform and inspire my audience to reconsider their wasteful and destructive behaviors, their acts and inaction, and bring awareness to their interdependence with the natural world. My creative research on trees, forest, and air quality began in 1992 when I was invited to produce new work for the exhibition Smog, A Matter of Life and Breath at the California Museum of Photography in Riverside. Southern California has long suffered from the worst air quality in the US due to a large population and car culture, as well as sunny, stagnant weather and a bowl-like topography. Each artist in the Smog Show was paired with a research scientist at the University of California, Riverside Air Pollution Research Center. At a meeting with my collaborator, Dr. Paul Miller, I asked, what was the best thing I could do as an individual to positively impact air quality? He said, plant trees. Over many weekends during the spring season, I planted over 1,000 ponderosa pine seedlings as a volunteer with the National Forest Service to reforest Holcomb Valley near Big Bear Lake. The area had been decimated during the 1860s California gold rush by mining, clear cutting, and cattle grazing. The reforestation project was intended to restore vital ecosystems in the Santa Ana watershed and improve both air and water quality in the inland region of Southern California. My planting experiences were physically labor-intensive yet emotionally profound and cognitively transformative, inspiring the creation of numerous works, including the site-specific installation, The Sacred Breath, seen here. The Sacred Breath is a meditation environment which focuses on the interdependence between human beings and trees and provides the participant with an experience of the breath as a life-giving gift from forests. The lung-shaped photographic altarpiece connects our bodies with forests, the lungs of the earth. On the altar sit chemistry flasks holding the essential life elements and ponderosa pine seeds. Positive affirmations for trees are contained in the constantly turning suspended prayer wheels. A handmade prayer book of tree photographs with the word inhale and exhale guide us through a breath meditation. For the show, I also produced the photo wall installation titled SOS, We Are Killing Trees, Therefore We Are Killing Ourselves, which presents photographs of the most smog-damaged trees in the US at the time. The images are printed on square and rectangle panels to create a visual statement, which is the International Morse Code signal, SOS. Many of my subsequent photographs and sculptural works evolved from my life-changing experience planting a forest. This large sculptural work titled Stand is a specimen-like replication of a fire-destroyed stand of trees. The installation of trees and seedlings included in Seedscapes is akin to Stand in my use of materials and high contrast film images of fire-destroyed trees. The work addresses both the fragility and resilience of nature, representing the cycle of birth, life, and death and rebirth, the memory of a forest, and the promise of new growth. These pieces vary in height and are installed against the wall like planks of wood, are stored and displayed for purchase in a lumber yard. Shadow images are cast into the wall to bring attention to the ephemeral aspect of life. For my most recent photo project titled Growing Air, I returned to the sites of my tree plantings for the first time 25 years later to find an extraordinarily beautiful and healthy forest of ponderosa pine trees inhabited by many species of wildlife. This one photograph from this extensive series is included in the Seedscapes exhibition with a short video documenting a day of planting 500 trees with a group of my students. My interest is with what is seen and unseen in the forest, historical, scientific, and spiritual, personal, and global. My photographs are my response to this unique place. I especially delight in visiting the pine trees during the spring when the forest is in full bloom. I experience a deep and profound connection with the land and recognize the power and sacredness of the trees. I walk through the young forest, attuned to the life force that surrounds me and the growing mycelium networks beneath my feet. I know that the trees are aware of my presence, and I express gratitude for all they give us. The trees, like the millions of others that are being planted worldwide, are required to restore the breath of life to our dying planet. My art life practice has evolved over the years from a solitary one to a more collaborative, integrative practice of eco-conscious living, art making, writing, lecturing and teaching, community organizing and building, curating and activism. I realize that I am but one voice, and that by bringing together artists, scientists, thinkers, writers, and community to share our varied perspectives and research-based findings has a much more substantial impact. Since July, I have been hosting a monthly online program called Tree Talk, Artists Speak for Trees. Each month, I invite artists working in a range of media to share their artworks and ideas about these most essential and extraordinary living beings. Additionally, guest scientists are invited to present their research, which contributes greatly to the dialogue. I am in the research phase of curating an exhibition and writing a book about the unique and iconic Joshua tree, which will be shown in 2024 in the Museum of Art and History in Lancaster, California, which is located on the west side of the Mojave Desert. The Joshua tree's survival is threatened by climate change, growing sprawl, and solar and wind farms in the Mojave Desert, industrial solar and wind farms. The sole habitat for this extraordinary plant is being totally threatened. My project brings together current research by scientists and diverse ideas and expressions by artists and writers that spotlight the endangered Joshua tree and the vital and sensitive ecosystem that supports them. I also work with natural conservation nonprofits in my region by donating my photography, writing op-ed pieces for publications, and meeting with elected officials on critical environmental issues facing Southern California. In addition to continuing to make photo works of young trees and ancient forests, I am contributing my time, energy, and money to both local and worldwide tree planting efforts. I am creating artworks and planting native trees with the hopes of inspiring positive, constructive, and peaceful action aimed at sustaining the breath of life on our planet and slowing or hopefully stopping climate collapse. All of my proceeds from my book, Prana Life with Trees, which includes 4 decades of my work focused on trees and forests, goes to nonprofits that are planting trees worldwide, including the Eden Reforestation Project, who to date has planted over 400 million trees. Finally, I wish to encourage each of you to plant native trees at home, or volunteer to plant an urban or country forest, or contribute to the nonprofits who are working to reforest our planet with 1 billion trees. We know that tree planting is critically important to heal the ecosystems that sustain life on our planet. We and many generations that follow will be grateful for your conscious act of beauty, kindness, compassion, and love. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Sant. That was fantastic. And thank you, all 3 of you. It's very, very interesting to contrast the sort of the locationness of your work, Sant, with the much more dispersed research of both Heidi's work and Dornith's work, both of whom travel very extensively. And I think that question of ethics comes up within that, and I don't know if any of you want to comment on that. I should say that I've looked in the chat room, and there are various people committing to planting trees and so on. And there's one question, well, there are 2 questions. One's very simple. Anne says, would you please, after we finish talking, Sant, put the link for Artists Speak for Trees into the chat room so we can all pick it up. We do have a question from Anna Doug. My question concerns the challenge for artist and curator of making photographs that in their materiality including photographic conventions of aesthetics and display, can offer the viewer the experience of the artist's own deep and affecting collaborations with scientists, archives, places, etc., as well as to address the seriousness of the climate challenge. Not all artists want to practice as activists, and neither should they feel they must. However, I wonder if the seriousness of climate change has affected any of the artists, other than Sant, to review their artistic practice and adapt it towards new forms of participatory engagement. So that also sort of ties back to the ethics and the significance of the situation. And I think, Dornith, you touched on that in your in relation to your installation in Canada, in fact. So I don't know if all three of you would like in turn to respond to those two dimensions, ethics and how your practice reaches out.
Do you want me to start first?
I don't mind. Yes, go for it.
Well, that's a really, it's a really good question, and it's a complicated question because, part of what I see as integral to the project about seed banking is to actually bring back images from inside seed banks around the world, because I do think that raises awareness in a way that is profound, especially since so many of them are underfunded and in terrible shape. And so you get there and in some ways it's been interesting because the scientists originally were like, you are welcome to come, but it's not, nobody's really going to care about this project. And then there was this amazing outpouring of interest and also funding, like the US Congress and budget impacts. So it is a trade-off, and I do worry about travel, but I also realize that it's important, like part of it is the witnessing part, and part of it is being there to bring back these images in a really fundamentally photographic way, that being on site and collecting these light rays that are bouncing off and experiencing that makes you able to talk about that kind of profound experience that is integral to it. And then of course I expanded that into trying to make seed banks and allow people to really have conversation, both of those seed banks that I did, one at the MOCA Toronto and one at the Ontario Science Centre, there were 5,000 individual conversations about the importance of preserving biodiversity led by volunteers, which of course also led to its shutdown in the pandemic because it was too intimate, it was too close, that there was like this touching and exchange and quiet conversation as people contemplated the choice they had to make. So.
I mean, one of the things that's discussed quite a lot at the moment is individuals making their own trade-offs so that, okay, you let yourself use a plane occasionally, but you don't run a car, that sort of approach. In other words, treating ourselves as if we have our own carbon budgets and we have an ethical responsibility to be aware of the trade-offs, and I think that's a valid point. Heidi, since your video's not on, I can't see whether you might be wanting to come in or not.
Let's say something.
Yeah.
I am here, Liz. Yeah, I think the question from Anna, it's a complex one and really, really important. And I think certainly for me, not only as an artist, as a human being, as an educator, as a citizen, the seriousness of climate change, of course, it is affecting my daily life. I want to be conscious and responsible as far as I'm able to in what constitutes my daily life. The traveling, I am questioning. I agree with Dornith that yes, it is witnessing what is happening, but I also feel work I do, it must be worthwhile. So what do we do with the art we do? where do we show artwork, where do we show films? And I think that's where the importance of art galleries, museums, collections, film festivals are hugely important to actually show the work that we're making. It takes us as artists a huge deal of money, time, effort, all kinds of things to make these works. And all we want is that the work to be seen and people to respond to. The questions that we prepared for, do we see kind of art as activism? You know, I never considered myself as an activist, but I do want the work, I want the work to do something for the people who sees it. I want people to react to it and to think, you know, is there any way to how that work can contribute to something in society for a better world? That is the aim. Whether it does that or not, I don't know. I cannot claim that. I think that is where the audiences, the people who engage with it is important. And in particular with this exhibition, I have missed opportunities to actually meet the visitors into the gallery to see the work. And I've not had the conversations with audiences as I usually would do when exhibiting work. So yes, this is complex, but I do think we have, we need to be mindful how we are using our knowledge, you know, to make the work we do.
I was just reflecting, I'll come to you in a second, Sam, but I was just reflecting in response to that this whole enterprise was an accident that started from myself and Pippa happening to see Dornith's work at the same time at PhotoFest in 2016 and having a chance discussion about it on a coach going back to the hotel. And a couple of weeks later, Pippa contacted me and said, Liz, you know what we were talking about? How about proposing an exhibition? And now here we are having this incredibly rich conversation, which can be traced back to a seed planted through viewing Dornith's work. So, you know, that does illustrate something about the value of placing something in a public sphere. Sant, yes, you would.
I actually was going to say a very similar thing, Liz, which is, you know, that I might be out there physically planting seeds, all the artists in the exhibition, and through your curatorial practice, you're planting the seeds of thought, the seeds for people to consider their you know, own lives, their life experience, and how everything is impacting the planet. So it's all about seed planting, either physically or conceptually. It's about seed planting. But what I wanted to talk about in terms of the difference between, you know, the work that I do and all the traveling that my colleagues do, is that I think that all of that originated for me from the fact that I grew up in New York City and I moved to California after college, and I was so displaced through the experience of moving from that urban environment to Southern California that I was already a working photographer, and I used my camera to basically take myself out into the world to kind of look around. And in a sense, I was going outside for the first time because my life in the city was so much about inside. And that was, you know, in 1975. And it's been a whole evolution of things that have happened in my own personal life that has made me who I am. And it started with that act of just observing the place where I lived. And all of it has kept me focused on this on where I live. So, you know, I lived in the Santa Ana watershed for like 40 years. So I was focused on, you know, everything that was in that watershed. Now I live in the Mojave, and I live among Joshua trees, and I'm really concerned about what's happening with, you know, the demise of Joshua trees. So it's about this closeness that I feel with the place, this connection I feel with the place where I am. And I do miss not traveling and being to physically be with all of you. I miss that, you know, but I was just talking to my husband about it this morning because we're going to be doing this. And I said, but at the same time, look at all the energy that's being saved, all the fuel that's being saved by not having to travel, you know, 6,000 miles. So, and I also want to mention in terms of the sort of materiality of what I do, I think about it all the time. And because my entire lifestyle is about trying to live a simple and minimal life. Everything I eat, everything I do. And I don't make big photographs because I'm like, you know, I want to visually, and I love them, but I deal with my own level of my own guilt about that. So I make small photographs, you know. So it's, you know, it's just a personal choice that one makes on how they choose to live their lives. And I have so much respect for the art photographers in the show and the work that they're doing. It's just, it's very inspiring to me.
Thanks, Sant. Somebody remarked to me the other day that we're all forgetting to take into account the sheer cost in materials and resources of using our laptops and linking globally, and of the, you know, megabytes of storage and so on that's going on. So I don't think I think there's an equation that I can't possibly do, because it absolutely isn't my world. I'm not a technologist, where we think because we're sitting in our own homes that we're not offending some of the footprint rules. But in fact, we are, just in other ways. And somebody somewhere who knows much more about this than me one day will make some sort of an assessment of this. We have a comment in the chat room which is about saying a bit more about aesthetic and material dimensions of working as artists within this context. And I wonder if that's something that might be picked up in the final half hour, in the more general forum that, well, we have a half-hour discussion. And Anna, you made that comment, but you might want to raise it in the forum personally, so that I can hear more about where you're coming from. Meanwhile, I would very much like to thank Sant, Dornith and Heidi for fantastic presentations and challenging us all to think a bit more about a range of things. Thank you. Pippa.
Thank you, Liz, and thank you to everybody for that, you know, such an interesting session. Again, so many things that we can talk about. And, you know, we really wanted to keep aside this half an hour because to bring sort of some of the threads together of some of the things that we've been talking about throughout this session. We've touched on some really fascinating and urgent topics. You're all working through a really wide range of approaches and perspectives. I've been keeping an eye on all the questions and chat that's been coming through throughout this day, and I wondered what we're going to do now is sort of metaphorically invite all of the speakers back together, and I thought it'd be really useful to go back to Simran, who opened this event. We've had lots of responses to Simran's introduction, some of the really, you know, terrifying statistics about the rate of the loss of biodiversity that she shared with us. And what Simran highlighted the scale of this problem, and I think also the ways in which it's not a natural disaster, it's a structural and systemic problem that's tied up with questions of power and capitalism. And these are very, you know, these are overwhelming issues. And one of the questions we had from one of our audience members, Marjolaine, who's saying, in response to this, I find it so upsetting. The question for the panel and everybody is, what can we actually do to protect the world's plants? Ideas, big or small. What can people actually do? What kind of steps can they take to make a difference as individuals?
I love this question. Thank you. This is the part I didn't get to in my presentation. My apologies. We do have agency and we do have opportunity. All those statistics are terrifying. A lot of that shift has happened in the last century, even more so in the last few decades due to the industrialization of seeds. There's a lot of attention given to like genetically engineered seeds, right? But these corporations are the ones that corporatize all seeds. I would say it starts with seeking out diverse seeds. That means seeking out some of those kind of food varieties you'd find at a market, a farmer's market, as opposed to an industrialized grocery. It starts with saving seeds. It starts with trying to support the people who are doing this. Go to those cafes, find a little pot, put some seeds in it, watch something grow. Go have a craft beer instead of buying a beer in your grocery store. Like, there are so many ways that seeds manifest, as I addressed. So like, we can find points of engagement and intersection. And I'll also say one last thing around seed libraries. There are now a growing number of these housed within actual libraries. So you can actually share seeds through those networks as well. And that's just a real way to say, we don't want these to be lost. We don't want them to be homogenized. And in our own way, we will A, address the system, but then B, on our own and engage in individual actions.
That's great. Thanks, Simran. And if you have any resources that you want to share with our audience, please put them in the chat. That would be fantastic. I suppose kind of following on from that, and this is a question for the artists, is how do you go about making work that is, well, possibly activist, but certainly that's trying to create some kind of change in the viewers or the people that experience it? How do you encourage people who view your work to engage with these difficult issues in a positive way? Is there a way, how do you make work that isn't didactic, for instance? Sant, yeah.
I have found that making it engaging and interactive, which I've seen in other, I know Dornith has done that as well. And I think having the viewer participate in some way that's not totally passive seems to make a difference. That's been my experience. Not to say that art that is more passive is not engaging or can do the same thing, but that's just been my experience. Also, to create some opportunity for them to provide their voice, interact, even if it's just writing something or making some statement or giving them something to do in response when they leave, even. That's just been my experience.
Heidi, do you want to comment?
Yeah, I just have that how I go about making the work. For me, I'm just really curious to find out how people think, the people I'm working with, the scientists who are so driven by some kind of quest, and I don't know anything about this, so I just want to find out. And that's the starting point with conversations, and then it's a kind of joint discovery that is coming along the way, that I hope the audience will find as well.
This is just coming in, and it sort of relates to what we're just talking about, but from artist Helen Sear, who's with us, says, is there room for the enigmatic, playful or problematic? And I guess this is to any of the artists.
I'll say something, yeah. I think that's a really nice comment. And perhaps it goes back also to the other comment about what does it mean to kind of reactivate, and what's the role of an artist, you know, in working with a scientific archive. And it was interesting listening to Chrystel talking about a harmonious kind of relationship. And I think in my work, I've experienced friction. I mean, not hostile friction, but a sense of kind of push and pull, because I don't see my role as kind of visibilizing the science, but maybe as kind of reimagining, reinterpreting even. I mean, maybe less in this project, but I'm interested in the role of fiction in relation to archives and what that can do and what that can bring, because it kind of loosens the work from the science in a way, I think, that makes it more accessible, because often science is not accessible as it is when it's presented as science. So I'd agree with Helen. I think there's a really big role for being very playful and what other word did you use, Helen? Sorry.
Enigmatic.
Now.
Enigmatic.
Enigmatic, yeah. Or problematic.
Yes. I mean, I think, you know, I wouldn't, I am an environmental activist. When I come to, that doesn't collapse down into being an artist. So I think activism is part of being an artist, but there's other things going on too. I definitely have a philosophical interest in the question of how, of what kind of knowledge sits in archives, of how science makes certain kind of claims to knowledge. So I'd say I'm interested in a kind of philosophical and a poetical as well as an environmental kind of approach to working with archives.
Is Miranda there? I can't see her on my screen. I'm sure she's still there.
Yes,
I just
I'm
wanted
here.
to add something to that from your perspective as a scientist and curator in terms of making different kinds of knowledge accessible, and what artists or what visual art can do perhaps that other languages may not be able to do, or reach people that wouldn't otherwise be reached.
Yeah, I think for me, I understand all what you're saying there, Liz, and for me personally, I see I've got this label as a scientist, but it doesn't, for me personally, it doesn't exclude me from, you know, being part of all of it. To what would I like to see? What, you know, like, what, I'm a member of the public too. What would my does my family understand what I do? What a scientist might put out there? So I'm always thinking about different levels of engagement at any point in time, but I do appreciate there are some hard and fast ruled scientists that might see some of this work as, well, we use this term a lot, about dumbing down the science, when it's not, well, in my opinion, actually doing that. It's facilitating what you do in your world. We got to have a holistic point of view about it all. And, you know, if we're all saying, oh, you know, nobody cares about certain aspects, you know, about plants and seeds and the way the world is. Well, why is that? I was really, I was really struck by this last session. It did really engage me, and I'd like to think it would engage other scientists too. The images that you were all showing, you know, I just wanted to, and it just shows about your work, I just wanted to be immersed in it, physically though, actually be there, you know, and so that says something, and I'd like to think my engagement with other scientists for them to see in that way, that it's not just the scientific, the way the information is given out, that, you know, it's all about value and what you put value on, and it's not just about the scientific information, it's about all the other bits that come along with it to provide an understanding about plants, seeds, and everything that we do. Sorry, it's a bit long-winded and everything, but you know, I do come across, yeah, the I don't know if it's difficult. Well, just quite a narrow point of view in the scientific world in terms of engaging people. I mean, if we talk about we want advocates for the planet, then it's got to just be more than just one way of thinking about it, and trying to inspire and engage people to care a lot more. Anyway.
Thanks, Miranda. And I think when we first kind of met, you know, a month or so ago, and we were having this talk and about, in this country especially, there's been a, you know, a sad divergence, I think, between science and art in terms of education and how it's valued in politics and so on, and they can't, and then they're not connected, and then there isn't creativity in science and there isn't investigation in art. And I think these are really not accurate ways at all of viewing it. And one of the things I love about this exhibition is how the artists, you know, how precisely they kind of display that that's not the case. So there's so many questions coming through. We've got some questions about archives. I thought it'd be nice to go back to the question which was about the idea of reactivating archives, whether archives are in some ways, do they need someone to come and unpause them, as it were? Does that deny the agency of the specimens or the archival photographs in some way? I wondered if anybody wanted to speak to that.
I can say a word.
Thanks,
because I feel that, you know, I've reactivated a photographic archive, and it's interesting because it was a photographic archive within the Natural History Museum that deals with seeds and herbarium and other artifacts and collected. And here we are looking at photographs, which is not really the specialism you would find at the Naturalist Museum. And that's why it was actually quite interesting for me to look at these photographic archives. And often the scientists I worked with kind of talk to me as a specialist, photographic specialist. I would kind of know more about the glass plates and the technique, the technology around that. And so that was actually quite interesting as well, to kind of share knowledge. And going back to the question before about, you know, making sure that we are touching the public in some ways. And it's interesting, this is something that started to happen to me where I really wanted to share what I found in terms of when I did work in Croatia in national parks and looking at you know, this kind of very complex ecological places where the public is interacting with wild animals and all this stuff, and really quite interesting questions around ecology and around climate change. And I think that it's really important for us to show the work, and to what I'd like to share what I found in these museums, in these places, and discussions I've had with scientists. And the best way to share it was, okay, to have an exhibition, so to kind of engage with the public, to bring in conversations. And I really think that it's actually quite interesting to, yes, to share.
Thank you. I think also I've just put in my kind of perspective as head of program at Impressions Gallery, and what, you know, one of the things that we say Impressions Gallery does is help people understand the world through photography. And hopefully what our exhibitions do are reach people that might not have known anything about this subject before, and I'm including myself in that. Before I saw Dornith's work, I wasn't aware of this issue, and I probably wouldn't have, I wouldn't have picked up a scientific journal or read about it some other way, but through visual means. And that's the same for our audience as well. That's how I've kind of come to know much more about this topic and to be interested enough to actually take some action. So yeah, just to kind of share that perspective in terms of you know, what a gallery can do as well. I wondered about maybe there's a couple of questions about some sort of recent events here. Someone's been asking about Brexit, and does this have implications on the ways in which seeds are shared or imported? I don't know if anybody has any knowledge on that.
I don't. Well, I know that the Millennium Seed Bank has research partnerships around the world that were outside. It was not through the European Union, so I can't imagine that it will. I'm sure it'll be affected, but they're, you know, reaching out and working with these smaller banks all over the world in really interesting ways through the Wellcome Trust. So I feel like there's hope there.
Great.
There are also a lot of local seed companies. We have one down here in the southwest of England called Tamar Organics, who are, you know, they're a small business. You don't have to go to the big companies that are maybe sourcing internationally and so on. Wherever you are, there are people who are working closely with local crops and so on.
There's a whole movement of local activism or local crops in all parts of the UK. You know, obviously up here in Yorkshire, it's my keen interest, and it's what I do. I grow vegetables, and so I think Brexit, put that to one side, because yes, that is going to affect, but I think, you know, that this local activism or local interests, there is still some hope. I'm sort of agreeing with Liz as well.
And also, if you think about seeds that are distributed by smaller companies are specific to place. They're often regional, so they'll bloom in the places where they're planted, with oftentimes with a lot less requirement for synthetic inputs like pesticides, fertilizers, herbicides. So they're just a brilliant way to support the local economy, to support heirloom biodiverse seeds, and then also to reduce the kind of you know, the chemical load that we put into our earth and our water. And I'll post a link in the chat for anyone who is US based. I actually connected with a number of those companies because we've seen with the pandemic, a huge rise in seed purchases by people who are really scared when they confront empty store shelves or when they try to fill in gaps on their own personal food insecurities. That, you know, that's what people are trying to do, which maybe is one of the thin silver linings of the challenges that we're facing.
Yeah. And in a related and kind of interesting, on a different level, is that I was on a panel with somebody from the U.S. Department of the Interior and the Bureau of Land Management, and they are working to restore wildfire lands that have been wiped out, you know, just thousands and thousands of acres. And so what they've found is it's made them collect native seeds, because they found that the micro environments are so narrowly defined that they could go to a valley and have seeds from, you know, the hillside won't grow on the valley as well as reversed. So these kind of co-evolutionary with the landscape and the microclimates, it's been really interesting to kind of find out about as we're looking for these other remediation for, you know, other climate change like wildfires. It's just, so outside of the human scale, you know, I keep bringing it back to, like, instead of, for me, my interest is the landscape and the humans, not so much the human scale, but like how we might restore native lands as well.
Thanks, Dornith. Can I just go back to the issue that Simran just mentioned, which is the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic? And I know that you've recently written about this and published on this topic. And I wondered maybe if you could just tell us a little bit about how has COVID affected seed conservation, and how has it affected public attitudes to environmental issues? Is there more, do you think there's more of a willingness now for people to engage with environmental issues that perhaps there wasn't before? Or what are you seeing?
But first of all, how is it impacting conservation, the pandemic? I'll tell you, I am in Mexico to do a story on smallholder farmers conserving maize, and also the ex situ collection at CIMMYT, which is the largest collection of maize in the world. However, they've been closed. So that was in March. I've been waiting for them to reopen. You know, a lot of course, institutions have been compromised, not only them. I'm very concerned about what's happening with the intensity and volatility of storms as a result of climate change. The hurricanes, as many of you may know, are unprecedented in their number this year. Well, guess what happens when the fields get flooded? You know, and all those precious seeds then disappear if we haven't created those backups. The second thing I will add is, in relation to the pandemic, what I wrote about was that people are now having pandemic in their consciousness as it relates to human health, but this is exactly why we have backups like Svalbard, like Kew, like the myriad small and large institutions, because pandemics occur in seeds. And when we sow in monoculture, as I mentioned in my talk, one pest, one disease can wipe everything out. We have become so vulnerable. The biodiversity that we save is our backup plan. When we talk about backup seeds, it's not in isolation. It's the genetic material that we may need to breed back into our crops in the future to sustain and support food security. Happy to answer more if I forgot something.
Yeah, no, that's great. And that, well, I guess the other thing, and maybe the artists and other speakers want to come in as well, is just about, you know, do you think there is a shift in public attitudes because of what's going on? Is there a readiness to embrace or tackle some of these environmental issues? Do they feel more urgent than they did before? Don't know if anybody wants to pick up on that. Yeah, Sant?
You know, I've had some conversations, mostly online, of course, about this issue. And it seems that a lot of people that I've spoken to are not making the connection between the pandemic and the state of the planet. They're not relating to the fact that the virus is part of nature, and how that's all interconnected. I think that that's, and so I think that that's sort of like a first step to have that realization. But I have noticed that what Simran was talking about, a lot more people are growing their own food. And it's like, that's the one thing. I think first was toilet paper, and the second thing was food, right? That the things that they were thinking about in terms of the pandemic, which is really interesting to me, before they were even considering mask wearing and their own health, at least here in the United States, where I know you're in lockdown in the UK, but it is really bad here. And we are all hopeful here that in terms of mitigating climate change, of course, as well as the virus, that things are going to change here in January. You know, we've been faced with a very, very rough last 4 years, and that has slowed down anything and everything. So, you know, we're extremely hopeful that there's going to be a big political shift in this country, and that we'll be partners again with the rest of the world. So,
yeah. Can I say something as well? Can you hear me?
Go ahead, Liz.
I was just thinking about your question. But yes, absolutely, Sant. We're all so relieved and hope. Yeah. Partnerships with nature as well as the world. The thing about the virus is so interesting, I think. I feel like it's, you know, it's kind of demonstrated our connectedness to nature, but there seem to be two kind of responses, and one seems to partly be, oh my God, we need to kind of protect ourselves better from nature. So almost a further kind of retreat or desire for a separation. Like where I live, car use has gone up dramatically. It's horrendous. There's traffic jams, you know, all day.
Oh, that's interesting.
But on the other hand, you know, for others, I guess it helps us appreciate how we are part of nature. And actually we need to recognize those connections and be much more respectful. So I don't think there's a single, do you know, I think there's not probably a different thing, you know, and it's an economic question as well, isn't it? Definitely.
I just want to respond a second to Liz. Here in the United States, we're finding that during the pandemic, people are spending more time in nature than they ever have.
Yeah.
That people are going into the national parks, the state parks, that they're walking, that they're forest bathing, they're taking in as much fresh air, oxygen as they possibly can. You know, spending so much time in their enclosed spaces. And then, so I think there is actually a growing more connection with being in those, you know, with the trees and, you know, with the ocean, and that they feel safe in those environments. So they're feeling safe in those environments.
I think that's a really good, positive place to end, because unfortunately we're almost at the end of our event, but that's a really good way, I think, to wrap up and kind of leave us on a moment, you know, a moment of hope. Thank you. It's been an absolutely brilliant afternoon. It's been completely fascinating. We've had some really, really interesting, thought-provoking presentations. It's been alarming, it's been sobering, but also very inspiring. So thank you so much. Thank you to our artists, Dornith Doherty, Sant Khalsa, Chrystel Lebas, Heidi Morstang and Liz Orton. Thank you so much for our guest speakers, Simran, Sethi and Miranda Lowe. We've really, really valued your contributions to this event today. And thank you very much to our chairs, Anne McNeill, and especially Liz Wells, for curating such an interesting and important exhibition. We are really, really grateful to you. I also want to thank Jane and Angela, my colleagues, who've been working really hard behind the scenes to make it, this event run really smoothly. And of course to all of you, our audience, for your really brilliant questions and comments. And I have to say, this is probably one of the best chats I've ever seen in any of these kinds of events. So that's just been really wonderful. So many knowledgeable people in our audience with really interesting insights.
Connor has just asked about the recording and where he might be able to find it.
It's all right, it's coming up. But
we haven't planned to make the chat available because just for GDPR reasons, it's got everybody's names in it. But you can, is that right, I think? But I think actually you might have the option just to download it.
There is the option
to do that. Yeah.
Those
yeah.
three little dots on the bottom.
Yeah, there's a little ellipsis, it's like a three
One
dots.
person at a time, Angela. Angela Shear, do you want to explain how people can download it?
Yeah, I can do. So if you go to, as Pippa said, the little three dots that's just next to where it says file, and then if you click save chat, and that'll download it straight to your computer from there.
Angela.
And then you're going to mention the recording being put on the website.
Yeah, just to let you know, we have recorded this event. What we'll do is we'll make it available on our website, so it will be on the exhibition page. Give us a few days to do that, so we'll need to just kind of edit it and then we'll get it ready and we'll have it on there with the rest of our resources. So just to remind you, the show ends at Impressions on the 12th of December. We do hope we're going to be open again before then, but as you know, England is in lockdown until the 2nd of December. We don't know if it will be extended or what's going to happen. Hopefully there'll still be a chance to come in and see it in person, but if not, we do have our VR exhibition and lots of other resources on our website, including an essay by Curator Liz Wells. There's lots more that you can engage with there. I also want to just say again that Seedscapes is a touring exhibition, and it will be going to the Royal Albert Memorial Museum and Art Gallery in Exeter from the 6th of February to 2nd of May. And I know that Lara Goodband, who's the curator of contemporary art there, has been with us in this event and been adding to the chat. So it's been great to have you along as well, Lara. And Seedscapes will be shown there alongside a new artist commission by Leonie Hampton, as well as seed collections from the museum. So I think that will be a really interesting version of the exhibition there. We do have one final request, which is we would love your feedback on our digital programme and on the event today. Really, really need your kind of help to support us to get better at creating more of the content that you want. It's a very short survey. We'd really appreciate it if you could just take a few minutes to do that. So I think, Jane.
Can I just say something about the chat?
Yes, please do, Anne.
So if you can't download the chat, someone just said you can't do it from a phone. We will keep this Zoom link open until about 20 to 6. So if you want to just spend some time yourself scrolling backwards and forwards through the chat, you can do. Right.
Thanks, Anne. Yeah. So, so we'll put the link to the digital survey in the chat there, and as Anne said, we'll keep this sort of channel open till about 20 to 6, just so that everybody's got a chance to kind of get all the links and just get the information that they need from that. So yeah, thank you to everybody once again. It's been an absolute pleasure. We hope to see you back with us at Impressions Gallery at some point, whether that's in person, but more likely online. And just say have a great weekend, everybody, and goodbye from all of us at Impressions. Thank you.